Hello everyone, Zeno What If here. Those that are new to the channel, subscribe to see some of the content I made. Leave a comment down below for any ideas. Listen here YouTube. I do not own anything and this is not a scam. Link down in the description of the fanfiction of this, What If. To bring in part 4 of What If the Gate appeared in G.I. Joe. Chapter 6, Godison's Disaster. In the trailer that was serving as General Hazama's temporary headquarters, Centurion held an emergency meeting of his senior commanders. On the table before them under a plexiglass overlay was an enlarged overhead photo of the surrounding area as seen from UAV surveillance drones. Centurion marked their own position with a black grease pen. He then drew a large red circle to their east. According to our recon, there is a large army encamped 20 miles east of us. A rough estimate puts it at well over 100,000 men, he said. It's been led by the imperial senator named Godison. He's also a royal magician. A magician turned senator? Asked Hazama. That's right, General, answered Centurion. We don't know much of him and does he has to do anything with the opening of the gate, but what we do know, is that he's a strong pusher of the war. Now he's in charge of the army sized about 4 legions. While it would be nice if they just sat there and waited for us to blow them off the map, I think we have to predicate our actions on the assumption that they're already on the move, Marine Colonel Emerson concluded. Agreed, nodded Hazama. Recommendations. Colonel Lowe, commanding the 1st Brigade Combat Team, Bastogne, of the 101st Airborne Division scowled. My preference would be to hit them head-on. Unfortunately, our logistics are a mess. Air support is zilch, our artillery is towed only and our vehicles will have to rely on the fuel in their tanks for the moment. They've got a huge army, Emerson pointed out, if they split their force. Whatever we do, we have to keep them off Gibraltar, said Lowe, using the code designation of what the locals called Alness Hill. The engineers need time to get POL operational and then we can get our helicopters operational. POL stood for Pipe Operational Logistic Express and once connected would maintain a stable flow of gasoline, aviation gas, and diesel fuel, the lifeblood of a modern military. There also being a pneumatic tube for the delivery of other cargo. The intent was to reduce demand for vehicles transiting the gate. Colonel Kengan grunted in agreement. The sooner my helicopters can fly, the better for all of us. Especially since we're effectively blind without them, added Lowe. Which again only underscores our problems, gentlemen, Centurion reminded them. We need solutions. We should use a squad of lavs to scout whether their army has begun moving. Then we can bring up our artillery, advised Colonel Camo. Centurion frowned in thought. Agreed, but remind them to avoid being drawn into engaging actions. Without air support and with most of our troops still required to cover Gibraltar, you cannot afford to attempt to fight 100-1 odds. Do not forget, as primitive as their equipment and doctrine may be, these are still professional soldiers. We cannot take them lightly. We want to encourage them to be cautious of attacking us head-on while we get ourselves sorted out. We are not seeking a general engagement at this time. Colonel Camo frowned unhappily at this. He was confident in his troops' ability to handle an army of primitives. He had been both pleased and frustrated at the battle in Tokyo. Pleased at how easily his men had routed an army nearly as big as this one, but frustrated that while General Yamane had led the main force of the division out of Narima to great glory, Camo's role had amounted to little more than clean up after pushing down from Saitama with the 32nd Regiment. With General Hazama's orders, there would be little chance of a decisive glory. Centurion continued, unaware of his subordinate's thoughts. In the meantime, we'll start setting up our forward observation base. I don't want to chance another army surprising us. We have no concrete intelligence on how many men the enemy can field. This may be the bulk of their army, but if it isn't, I have no intention of being surprised. Centurion indicated a ring of smaller hills around Gibraltar. Colonel Emerson, I want you to deploy a company each to these 3 hills. He indicated 3 hills covering them to the north. Colonel Lowe, you will place a company on each of these 3 hills to the south. The 2 Americans acknowledged their instructions. Hazama and I will be meeting with Commander Miller for a briefing on our construction teams, Centurion told them. Dismissed. We have had 3 more riders come in from Alness. General Galba jabbed a finger at the map. May we now consider it confirmed that Alness has fallen to the enemy? He demanded of Senator Godison. Or do you still consider it hysteria? the veteran cavalry commander demanded in disdain. The senator had made it quite clear the gods would never allow sacred Alnus to fall into barbarian hands, and that they were merely waiting for calmer heads to prevail before they entered the gate to avenge their brothers and conquer the godless barbarians. Godison flushed darkly. He was being openly mocked now. Damn Titian and whatever fate had allowed this sacrilege to happen. Yes, reluctantly I must conclude that Legate Titian has failed in his mission and allowed sacred Alnus Hill to be taken. Then we must march in strength now, insisted Galba, to the approval of the other commanders. Godison suppressed a grimace. That was not the battle he had wanted to fight. He wanted to fight an open battle where he could surround and annihilate his enemy, not a close assault on Alnus Hill where the enemy might slip back through the gate and deny his victory. Unfortunately, the longer he waited here, the more disaffection he would engender from his subordinates. There was no choice. Very well. The army will march to Alnus at once. To Alnus, his generals raised their fists in anticipation. Lady Octavia noted that there was definitely a change in her people this morning. Last night's feast had been a wonderful move. Her people were more at ease around their hosts, who, in turn, though still professional, seemed a bit more at ease around them. All but one. Lieutenant, there is something troubling you. It was a statement, not a question. Have out with it. Although she was smiling, this was not a request but a command to one she considered as part of her family. What gave me away? Asked Taylor. For starters, last night, when someone presents a story, they usually don't tend to look either bored or perplexed by it. During last night's movie, you appeared to be both at times. That tells me you may know tales of this King Arthur, but you did not know the telling at all. That wasn't what you originally planned to present, was it? She looked at him with her best, motherly, look. I guess if I was going to make an emergency substitution, I should have shown Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. My son, you are babbling. Taylor sighed. All right, I originally planned to show you a movie called Gettysburg. It's about a battle in my country's Civil War. Probably the single most important battle in that war. I wanted to show you a bit about who we Americans are. And why didn't you? Because Chief Richardson was right. A movie wasn't the best way to make the points I had in mind. Some things are better simply stated rather than talked around by parable, Octavia told him. Now what is so significant that you let it eat at you rather than discuss it openly? All right, slavery. To your people, it's the normal way of things. To mine it is one of the most vile institutions ever created. Go on, Octavia commanded. That's why he was so shocked when I worried that my children would be made slaves. Why would I not? We brought slaves with us, the Empire wages war to obtain them. And yet, we have not seen a single slave here. It is a horrible thing to us and yet I have brought such a thing into your sight as if it were no more than our tunics. She placed a kind hand on his shoulder. I do wish you had only said this much sooner. If you had been a monster, it would have been easy to yell at you and tell you how completely messed up you and your whole civilization were. But you've been a considerate, rational, and compassionate person. And seriously, what would the yelling have accomplished? Aside from making me look like a maniac in your eyes, it wouldn't have actually helped anyone. While I do appreciate the not yelling, the not discussing also does no good to anyone either, replied Octavia. As you have said, in the Empire, it is the natural way of things. But here I have had the horrible privilege of having all the protections and pretenses of my world stripped away. She took a deep breath. At home, I congratulate myself that my house follows the old laws. We do not beat our slaves. They are well fed, well clothed. They are taught reading and writing. A slave may even earn the money to buy his or her freedom. And yet here I feared for my children, not because I saw men who would be cruel masters, but that I want more for them than that. My self-congratulation cannot hold up against that. Hypocrisy is not a trait I tolerate from others, and I do not like to find it in myself, William, she said, using his given name for the first time. She stood up and looked out into the courtyard. I do not know if the Empire is ready to become what your people are. It is still the way things are for my people to hold slaves. It is such an integral part of our society and our economy that many will revulse at the notion of simply dismissing slavery. But here, in this place, there is no room, no excuse, and no need for it. All those held as slaves here shall be free under the law of the Empire, she stated with all finality. Then a thought occurred to her. Tell me, Lieutenant, what will happen when you find the people taken from your world? When you find the people holding them? Taylor considered his answer for a moment. We will demand their immediate release, and if the Empire refuses, we will make it increasingly expensive and painful to keep our people from us. Those found who have mistreated our people, we will want them for war crimes, I expect. Peace treaty or no, the people of the world will want someone directly punished. Octavia nodded in understanding, and on one other matter, she faced Taylor directly. Yes, Lady Octavia. William James Taylor Octavius, as a son of my house, you must never again hold your mind secret to me. You will not allow such matters to fester in silence. Taylor blinked. I don't recall becoming. She cut him off with a pleased look as the cat that had just swallowed the proverbial canary. As the lady of one of the great houses of the Empire, as I say, it is done. You want me to do what? Asked Scott. I believe, you've heard my request, Colonel, answered Centurion. But why Atami? You see, Scott, Atami was been trained as a ranger and as a member of special forces. In terms of our standards, he's a perfect GI. Joe material. His main specialty is escape and evasive, that's how he was able to outsmart his pursuers during the exercise. I'd also remember, he's a little bit lazy. True, but that's good. You see, Scott, there are 4 types of commanders: lazy, stupid, smart and industrious. Each officer has 2 of these qualities. The smart and industrious officer is a perfect staff worker, he can create a perfect battle plan and see to its success. The lazy and stupid are harmless, but he can be used in several certain situations. The smart and lazy officer is a perfect field commander, he can achieve his goal with minimum strength and resources. And finally, then there's stupid and industrious officer. This one's is the worst of them all. He gives his subordinates too much work, and he always boasts that he's the best commander in the world, but in reality, he's nothing more than an idiot who did the idiotic things. Officers like him are too dangerous not just for themselves, but to others as well, for they drag everyone around them to their own destruction. That's why stupid and industrious officer needs to be rooted out as soon as possible, before he can cause more damage than enemy does. I see, said Scott, so that's why you're so watching about Atami. Exactly, answered Centurion. Atami is a good field commander. He's got enough brains to complete the mission with minimum efforts, and he's also a perfect special forces operator. The only 2 things he's lacking now is his experience and motivation, which cannot be acceptable. Now that Japan is part of the Allied nations force, the JSDF will gonna participate with us in battles against Cobra Empire, once we done with this Empire shit. In such conditions, Atami's gonna need everything he knows to survive. We can take care of his experience, but what he needs now is some proper motivation to fight. So, why not ask the Japanese to do it? Scott, you know better than I am that they can't do anything about Atami, because they've already did. What we need here is some proper professionals who can put our otaku lover into shape. Like the ghosts. Exactly, Colonel. I want you to turn that slacker otaku into a real soldier. Consider it done, sir, saluted Mitchell. Good, said Centurion, I'll talk with Hazama, he'll arrange a temporary transfer of Atami under your command, and you'll do the rest. Yes, sir. Assigned to cover the north side of Hill 105, dubbed Alamo East, by the Marines of Charlie Company, 2nd Platoon had set up observation on the surrounding ground, part of a critical advanced warning network for the men back at Gibraltar. So far everything had been quiet, but somewhere about 8 miles away was one massive army. Charlie Company was instructed to observe, report, and to withdraw if confronted in force. Movement on the hill, Lieutenant Corporal Ames reported calmly. 2nd Lieutenant Mayor and Platoon Sergeant Killian immediately came over to Ames' vantage point to have a look for themselves. Far from the scouts of a great army, all any of them could see was a weathered-looking peasant poking around with frustration. Looks harmless enough, but you and I will go see if we can get our visitor to find a safer bunch of rocks to go poking about, the lieutenant told Killian, who nodded. The 2 men picked their way down the hill to the startled local. He seemed to flinch at their sudden appearance. You're not bandits, are you? I don't have anything worth taking right now, and I promise I really wouldn't be enough fun to be worth killing. Had either of the 2 Marines considered it for a moment, they might have been impressed at how well this local spoke their language. While it was true that the local noble class were known to speak a variant of English, it was reported that the normal common dialect was a mangled form of Latin. As it was, they were merely concerned about calming this poor man down. Easy there, friend, Mayer told him with open hands, we're not bandits. What brings you out here by yourself? If there are bandits out here, isn't it a bit dangerous to go poking around? Oh, well, I'm a shepherd. My sheep were all frightened off by loud thunder coming from Alness Hill during the night. He shrugged helplessly. They're all I have, so what else am I to do? The two Marines looked at each other. On the one hand, having anyone poking about was a potential security risk. On the other hand, the Allies weren't planning on using their might to go killing, locking up, or terrifying the local shepherds. It wasn't as if this character had a hidden radio or anything. The lieutenant considered it for a moment. We have some friends who we'll ask to keep an eye out for your flock. In the meantime, why don't you come up the hill and we'll share some food with you and maybe you can tell us about yourself and folks around here. The shepherd nodded in thankful relief. Thank you. You are very generous. Oh, my name is Chorus. It is nice to meet you. Well, Chorus, follow me and we'll go talk to some friends, Mayer told him and started back up the hill with Killian bringing up the rear. As Chorus followed the lieutenant, he briefly glanced over in the direction of Alness Hill. Hardy, I wonder if you have any idea what you have done, he thought. Colonel Sherman Potter grimly stepped into the OR as Nurse Abel helped finish securing his mask. Most of the casualties coming in now were Satyran Imperials and there were plenty of them. He had just finished meeting with General Hazama about getting the full hospital up and running soonest. As of yet, only the barest essentials were finished, although he was told that the post-op module should be ready shortly. He made a quick survey around the room. Outside, Captains Spaulding and Ho were handling pre-op, Captain Pock was in charge of triage. In the OR, the rest of his doctors were hard at work. His attention lingered a moment on Major Charles Emerson Winchester III. The man was an excellent surgeon, but here that wasn't enough. A surgeon had to be fast as well as good here. Winchester. Move on. The bodies are literally piling up out there. Neatness doesn't count, Colonel Potter hollered as Corporal O'Reilly reported another batch of wounded arriving. Colonel, I refuse to rush a bowel resection. The aristocratic Bostonian huffed in reply. Why am I even here? You're here, Winchester, because we're supposed to have an even dozen surgeons and you're number 12. Now put it into overdrive. We don't have time to waste. Honeycutt. Help Winchester, ordered Potter. On it, Colonel. Kelly, close for me. Captain Honeycutt instructed his nurse and then rushed over to Winchester's table. Now see here, Colonel, an irate Winchester protested. Zip it, Winchester. Shut your yap and pay attention, ordered Potter. At the next table, Major Burns groaned as the next casualty was brought in. Oh my God, it's bad enough we have to work on the enemy, but this one isn't even human. I don't even know why they brought this thing in here. I'm no veterinarian. You're no doctor either, Frank, Trapper John countered. At the table behind Burns, Henry Blake turned around and looked. On the table was a slightly built girl of an apparent human age of 17 and with bluish-green feathers and bird-like feet. Henry sighed. Colonel, for once I agree with Frank. If this kid is going to have a chance at all, Pierce had better handle it. What about it, Pierce? Asked Potter, not looking up from his own work. I think we're out of danger here. Newsom, finish up for me, will you? Do I get to sew my initials in the stitches? Only on the inside, replied Pierce, as he changed gloves and shouldered Burns out of the way. What a mess. Frank, go find another table to work on your malpractice. Colonel Potter, Burns protested indignantly. He might not have wanted to operate on a non-human, but he could not stand to be shunted aside either. Burns, shut up. Now get a patient and start doctoring. Pierce put the flustered major out of his mind as he looked over this young girl's injuries. What a mess. Who says the human race isn't advancing? Every war we find improved ways to kill our fellow man. Or in this case our fellow avian. Even the operation could be fatal. She's already lost a lot of blood and we can't use any of ours. Margaret, get all the polyheme we have. Polyheme was an oxygen-carrying blood substitute. At present, polyheme was considered less than satisfactory for general use but did have the advantages in that it would not cause incompatibility reactions. In Pierce's thinking, it was the only choice that would not be 100% fatal to this girl. You know that's still experimental, noted Major Houlihan. What else can we do? If we don't use it, she'll bleed to death during the operation. He could only hope that her internal structure was similar enough to human that he could piece it all back together again. I'll get it right away. The Major hurried to retrieve the polyheme. Good. Now let's see if we can patch things up between the races, as it were. Now if they'll take a break from making more casualties, Hunnicutt observed sourly. No such luck, noted Trapper. What? Quit on all the fun, he quipped. Retractor, he said to Lieutenant Dish, who promptly provided the requested instrument. Remember that these fellows are the lucky ones, Potter reminded them. Be that as it may, Colonel, Captain Newsom replied. This fellow might not be too happy when he gets his bill. I'm sure I'm not on his HMO plan. Don't let Frank hear you say that, quipped Peace. He just might refuse to operate altogether. On the other hand, go ahead and say it. It might save some lives. Several hours later, a tired Colonel Potter asked Radar for a count on the wounded waiting. That's the last of them, sir. The young corporal checked his clipboard. And a good thing too, Corporal Klinger put in. If this keeps up, I'm gonna start bucking for a psycho discharge. Not a chance, Klinger, Pierce told him. We're all already crazy. Why do you think we're here? That was good work in there, people, Potter told them all. Pierce, that was one hell of a bang-up job you did on that avian girl. Well, someone had to, Colonel. Someone did a bang-up job on her already. Figures you'd sympathize with the enemy, scorned Burns. I always sympathize with kids that have had their insides spilled all over their outsides. It's a doctor thing. You wouldn't understand. What I wouldn't do for a long shower, mused Hunnicutt. I'm going to wash my face and go find a nice corner to pass out in. Captain Pock commented. If anyone needs me, have a nurse wake me, slowly. Father Mulcahy said something about sandwiches, noted Henry Blake. I'll wait for that. Well, the good news is that General Hazama says we have top priority from the construction and logistics folks. I suppose that's something, Trapper said tiredly. Actually, Colonel, Radar hesitated. There's one more patient. She walked in under her own power, but I think you should take a look at her personally, Colonel. Well, show her in. Radar. Yes, sir. O'Reilly stepped out and returned a moment later accompanied by the clopping of hooves. A beautiful chestnut mare followed behind him. It's a horse, sir. Mother of mercy. Captain Decker, commanding officer, Company A, 1st Battalion, 1st Brigade Combat Team, Bastogne, listened carefully to the radio reports coming in from the scouting force that 1st Division had sent out. The natives were definitely on the move and making a straight line for Gibraltar. That made the ground his men were standing on very important, being one of two main hills that flanked the enemy's axis of approach. Estimates of the enemy force were somewhere around 130,000 men. This was roughly the size of the armies at the Battle of Philippi. Against this mass of men was a force 1/10 that size busily trying to sort itself out through the single worst logistical choke point in military history. Decker's mind went back to his grandfather's stories of Chinese human wave attacks in Korea following the Yalu offensive. An enemy who was willing to throw away enough lives to get in close could do a lot of damage, even though Decker could not believe their current enemy could possibly defeat them. Although it's possible those guys are thinking the same thing, he considered to himself. At any rate, the best way to keep the enemy at bay was to break up his formation at range with indirect fire from the batteries of 155mm howitzers the Japanese had brought with them. That called for forward spotting, and people in the best position for that mission were his men on Little Round Top on the enemy's left flank and the Marines on Alamo East on the enemy right. While General Hazama and Colonels Lowe and Emerson had made it clear that they did not expect either force to ride it down in flames if the enemy attacked their positions in strength, the longer those spotters could direct the artillery fire, the more successful they would be in breaking up the enemy's attack. As he looked out on the huge force marching before him, he sorely wished he had at least some of the brigade's 105s with him. So do you think they'll try taking this hill? Lieutenant Carter, his executive officer, asked. I would. Sergeant Graham, he called to his runner. Get all the platoon leaders up here on the double. Yes, sir. Some generals led from the front. Godison was not of this mold. Even facing a battle he expected to win handily, there were always some unfortunate souls who went on to Emery's embrace. Senator Godison had no intention of being one of them. Instead, he and his staff rode with the 30th Legion, located immediately behind the lead ranks. This is not to say that the senator lacked any appreciation for the military arts, merely that he had a fine appreciation for his own importance. But as his army marched toward Alness, his eyes caught on the hills flanking his approach. He did not like the prospect of enemy scouts watching him. On the other hand, being in a better position to observe any possible movement by his enemy was perfect military sense. He turned to Crassus Linnaeus, commander of the 30th Legion, and addressed this. I want 2 turmae each to secure each of those 2 flanking hills immediately. Yes, sir. Inbound, Sergeant Wilkins announced as he looked through his field binoculars. Cavalry. Looks like 60 or so. Decker frowned in thought. A few mortar rounds and the company's M240 machine guns should be plenty to handle this force. The only question is whether the Imperials would take the hint and leave well enough alone once this first attack was repulsed. He very much doubted it. Set the mortars with high explosive rounds and fuses on proximity setting. I'd rather finish these guys before they get a good look at our positions, just in case one of them does the smart thing and gets the hell out of Dodge once we open up on them. Captain Decker had dispersed his javelin teams amongst his rifle platoons but kept the mortars near the top of the hill with his command unit. In the meantime, we had better let Gibraltar know our situation. In command vehicle, General Hazama and Centurion listened to the latest reports coming from Little Round Top and Alamo East. Fortunately, it did not appear that these probing attacks would jeopardize the ability of the spotters on those hills to direct the fire of his artillery batteries. He considered reinforcing the outpost hills in case the enemy decided to throw more their way, but the more units he sent racing all over the map, the more confused things would become. Confusion was an ally of the enemy, wasting precious time and energy. He did make a note to see what could be done to help Colonel Lowe expedite the deployment of his 105s onto the outpost hills. Beyond that, there was precious little for the generals to do for the moment but wait and stay out of their people's way. It had taken less than an hour for Godison to learn that both cavalry detachments had been all but wiped out. In that time, the leading ranks of his army had advanced 4 miles, and now as his mind tried to understand the wizardry that had killed them, he was about to be introduced to destructive magic on a level so powerful it beggared his imagination as with a sudden scream through the air, the earth erupted in smoke and fire, tearing into the ranks of the 34th Legion directly ahead, shattering men like the hammer of an angry god. What manner of sorcery is this? Godison wondered as more explosions erupted across the front 3 legions. He turned to Crassus. We've been lured into a trap. They must have powerful magic users on the hills flanking our approach. What are your orders? Crassus asked, a wave of panic starting to rise within him. As representative of the Imperial Senate, I am issuing an edict. Send messengers to all commanders that any failure to obey orders or any display of cowardice in the face of the enemy shall be immediately punishable by death. He gestured to the hills. They attack as wolves against a bear. We must clear our flanks while we continue to press on sacred Alness. He quickly checked the standards behind him. I want the 40th and 28th Legions to take the hill to our right and the 56th and 32nd Legions to take the hill on our left. I want prisoners if at all possible. Also, this will keep the enemy occupied as we close on Alness. Yes, sir, Crassus acknowledged. In the meantime, some 12 miles away, Hazama's artillery batteries, sighted in by the spotters on hills 105 and 107, adjusted their aim and opened up another salvo which scattered broken men, both dead and living, as Imperial officers, themselves shocked and terrified, tried to get control of their troops. Godison watched as the 39th Legion practically fell apart. Order quick march. Crassus paled. But sir, the men will be worn out by the time they reach Alness. Godison glowered. They can be tired or they can be dead. Yes, sir, Crassus hurriedly replied lest his hesitation be mistaken for disobedience. Godison merely nodded. He needed this man. His relations with the army had often been difficult. Commanders like Germanicus and Titian dismissed him for being too much of a politiker and a dilettante. But Crassus was different, and he shared one particular trait with Godison: ambition. Crassus longed for the power and prestige of political office. Godeson would sponsor his political prospects and Crassus backed his benefactors standing with the army. Now they needed each other most of all. Captain James Douglas, USMC, peered through his field glasses again. Yes, there were definitely two enemy formations breaking from the main body and heading in their direction. Captain Decker had reported the same over at Little Round Top. An estimated 11,000 men were heading for each of the two hills, guarded by little more than 200 men each. In the meantime, there were still 100,000 men heading for Gibraltar and the gate. The artillery would take a heavy toll, but unlike a video game, the ammunition expended did not just magically appear next to the guns. An average 155mm gun was expected to fire a conservative estimate of 200 rounds in a day. To supply that much ammunition to the 8 batteries of heavy guns available to Task Force Ginza meant the delivery of some 270 tons of ammunition a day. At the same time, the gate was feeding in construction equipment, food, fuel, helicopters, medical supplies. It was the Achilles heel of the Allied forces. Most of what ammunition there was would of necessity have to be directed on the main body threatening Gibraltar. Captains Douglas and Decker would be able to request some limited fire support, but by and large, they would have to rely on their own abilities to endure the human tidal wave bearing down on them. "All right, Lieutenant, how many MMPIMS do we have?" Captain Decker asked his XO as they went over defensive plans. The MMPIMS was a replacement for the old M18 Claymore mines, being smaller and with a reduced rear clearance area and capable of being fitted with laser or camera control options. 60, sir. We have them spread out to cover a 120-degree arc, accommodating the most likely approaches, angled to conform to the slope of the hill. Good. I want 3rd Platoon to leave one squad covering its sector and send a squad each to 1st and 2nd Platoons. It was a risk in leaving a third of his perimeter so weak, but that arc was facing Gibraltar. Decker needed his men facing the enemy. I want the Javelin teams I assigned 3rd Platoon up here. Also, warn the men to fire short, careful aimed bursts only. They run out of ammunition, we'll have to throw rocks at them. Yes, sir. The lieutenant paused. Captain, do you think it will get that bad? I mean, won't our artillery break them up pretty good? If men did the sensible thing, then the charge of the light brigade would never have taken place. We can hope, but we can't count on the enemy giving up. Lieutenant, did you know that after Pickett's charge, a lot of Confederate soldiers wanted Lee to give it another go? No, sir. The lieutenant was surprised. We think we know how a rational mind will react. Well, every culture has a slightly different idea what rational is. That's why we assume the worst case in our business. We can't afford to assume the other guy isn't trying to kill us. We plan accordingly. Yes, sir. Roger. 6. Standing by to execute. Fast shuffle. Major Stoltz acknowledged his orders from battalion. Executing special delivery now. At a nod, one Humvee raced off for Little Round Top. Emilianus was two things at this moment as he neared the hill, terrified and angry. The destruction of so many of his men was absolutely horrifying as he saw his legionaries shattered and maimed. That somehow this was the work, not of the gods, but of other men, men that fought not openly on the field of battle, but as cowards, killing from afar made him furious. Senator Godeson wanted prisoners. So be it. Emilianus intended to spare 2 of the enemy on the hill before him. He fully intended that the rest would be beheaded and their cowardly souls could rot in Hardy's domain. As long as these cowards live, let not one man among us turn from his duty. Conquer, or die. Godeson noted with relief as the ripple of explosions ceased to tear into his columns. His assessment had apparently been correct. Now directly confronted, the enemy mages were too busy trying to save their own skins to further disrupt his march on Alness. He knew that the troops he had dispatched to take the 2 hills were taking dreadful losses, but he still had no doubt that enough of his men would reach the tops and put cold steel to the enemy. The first of these assumptions then evaporated as, without warning, the foul enemy magic once more tore into his forward legions. Any relief that the legions attacking Little Round Top and Alamo East might have felt as the big guns of Task Force Ginza turned their attention back to the main body of the Imperial Army vanished shortly thereafter as the first lines of claymores detonated, spewing hundreds of metal balls each into the ranks of the 40th and 56th Legions. Emilianus swore as his mount reared, frightened by the explosions which had detonated behind him. He looked back to see his command dying. But their lives didn't matter anymore. Emery would be pleased with their sacrifice in battle. Aemilianus was only concerned that their killers go back to their thrice-damned mistress. Behind them, the 32nd Legion bore witness as Aemilianus rallied his surviving troops in a headlong charge up the hill. He and his cavalry racing far ahead of the foot and into a hail of fire from M4 carbines. Aemilianus thus fell with no great declaration of defiance, no immortal words. Only a footnote in the day's bloody toll. On the other flank, much the same fate saw the remains of the 40th Legion chopped down by the highly accurate fire from the new M27 rifles the Marine Corps had issued many of the troops deploying to Janus. Despite the carnage ahead of them, the 32nd and 28th Legions pressed onward. General Hazama and Centurion had been carefully listening to the reports from his subunit commanders. The outpost hills were still feeding good foe observation to the artillery, and a sizable chunk of the enemy had diverted to attack those positions. The men had been working unceasingly to unload ammunition stores and supplies, and now they were almost ready. "Stand by to commence operation," Raiden ordered Centurion. Theodosius Dumeril, who held the rank of Miles in the Imperial Army, marched toward the nondescript little hill with a feeling of dread that few of his current compatriots could understand. Until a few short weeks ago, he had been part of the 11th Legion and one of over 100,000 fighting men of the Imperial Expeditionary Army. Now he was one of some 30,000 men who had escaped the disaster on the other side of the gate and the subsequent incursion by the Hellsworn who lived there. At first, he and every other man among the survivors had been put to work by Legate Titian, building defenses, but gradually, most of the survivors had been reassigned to Godeson's Grand Imperial Army, where it was quickly apparent that the senator had a different set of priorities. New men and officers were transferred into the surviving legions so they could monitor and report on the reliability of those units. In the meantime, others such as himself had been transferred out. Theodosius was not certain why he had been chosen to be reassigned. Was it because he was considered particularly suspect? It could simply have been to make room for one of Godeson's objectiveers, as many half-jokingly referred to them. For whatever reason, he had been reassigned to the 32nd Legion. As for his former compatriots, the 11th Legion now marched in the center of the army, where they could neither hesitate from battle nor disengage without a more reliable unit at their backs. As added insurance, loyal cohorts now leavened the ranks of the suspect units. It was quite clear that Godeson intended for a tight lid to be placed down on what had happened to the expedition. That had not stopped Theodosius from trying to describe to his new companions just what he had seen on that awful day. They simply were not inclined to listen, as they made humorous sport of the issue. "So tell us about the Gate Worlders, Miles," his new commanding centurion had ordered. "I hear they are all at least 12 feet tall and their fangs drip with blood. I hear their eyes glow a burning red right into a man's soul, and after that, a man loses the feeling in his extremity. Tell us how they whoop and chant to their war gods and lick blood from their hands. Tell us, Miles. Is all that true? Is that why you all ran?" His new tent mates had all laughed, but Theodosius shook his head. "You don't understand. None of you do. They look like ordinary men, but they are as different from men as gods and monsters. They don't cry to Emroy or any other god when in battle. It's as if they are completely indifferent to gods. Their blood does not burn like a normal man's would. They are cold." My century blundered into a small group riding in a magic iron carriage. Someone had snorted in derision at that. Or it was pulled by phantom steeds. I only know there were no horses, and it moved faster than a chariot at the Maximus. He shot back. There were 4 men. Our centurion offered them honorable challenge. Whether they understood or not, I don't know, but as he charged at them, they struck him down with their thunder staves as if he was nothing to them. Their eyes cold, as if even the act of spilling blood in battle, or at least our blood, was no more than killing vermin. Not worthy of hailing to the gods, and then they looked at us as if we were rats with those same soulless eyes and started killing us. So yes, I ran. I ran as fast as I could to get away from those soulless things. The rest of them had all just laughed and shook their heads. "Stick close," one had told him in reply. "When they come, you'll see they're just barbarians. Maybe when you see how they die, maybe you'll remember where you left your manhood." All that was important to them was his self-admission that he had run. The jokes began over who would watch the coward. Whether they needed to take him to a woman so he could remember his manhood. How they would tease him to tell the story again. But Theodosius knew that he would rather Hardy claim him for eternity and put him to work in the pits of her lair rather than face those soulless men again, lest they devour his soul as he feared they had the thousands struck down far from Emroy's protective embrace. And now he was marching to face them again. How had it come to this? The second son of a tenant farmer, Theodosius had joined the army lured by the promise of pay, loot, and glory. After his 10 years, he could leave the army and buy a piece of land of his own. First, he would buy a little piece of land for his parents so they could have their own garden to till. If the plunder and slaves were as bountiful for the taking as the rumors claimed, he'd buy a couple of slaves for them so they would have a couple of strong backs to help them. His father could watch him raise his own sons, instead of working himself into an early grave. He would be the master of his own little kingdom, built with his own hands, his skill, and his loyalty. Instead, he saw only the prospect of death and his mother crying over his torn body. He briefly wondered how his friends were doing. Not the idiots marching beside him, but the tent brothers he had trained with, fought beside, played cards and shared humor with. Would any of them live through this? Ahead, they watched as the 56th Legion was cut down. The survivors backing down the slope to reform on the 32nd. The centurion of the lead century raised his sword to direct his men forward as the legate nodded, and then suddenly the centurion's head jerked violently back. The man was already dead as he fell from his horse. Heedlessly, the legate ordered his men on. "Good shot, Corporal," Sergeant Price told the squad's marksman approvingly. Apparently, the locals didn't know to stop throwing good money in after bad, and it was going to cost them. Corporal Madigan only nodded the slightest in acknowledgement of his squad leader as he chambered a fresh round. Unfortunately, the other officer had prudently moved back as he directed his men forward. Further up the slope, the rest of 2nd Squad, 2nd Platoon weighted company's situation had been improved somewhat by the arrival of medics from Charlie Company, along with a squad of men who were busy deploying claymores they had brought with them in case the enemy decided to try something more sophisticated than a straight-in charge and tried to get around a company's flank. Major Stoltz intended to send 2 of his rifle platoons to reinforce a company and hold pork chop with the remainder. Still, one could not help but be intimidated by the sight of nearly 8,000 men heading up their hill with barely 300 to stop them. Modern weapons or not, everyone knew that if the enemy did manage to get close, it would get very ugly, very fast. Some wondered if this crummy little hill was worth it. Captain Decker told them that the longer they stayed on that hill, the more effective the artillery would be in breaking up the huge army bearing down on their brothers and that intended to cut them off from home. That made this ground that a company would hold dear. Let the politicians and generals decide on war aims, and strategy, and the like. These were not the things that mattered to the men on Little Round Top. Let the big shots fight for grand ideals. On this day, these men fought for each other and fought to see home again one day. Godison glared in frustration at one of the 2 small hills as messengers informed him of the results of the initial assaults. It was inconceivable that the Imperial Army was suffering such losses while being completely unable to come to grips with the enemy. Taking a more careful look at the topography, he summoned Crassus to his side. Within minutes, orders were being passed. Orders that promised to make matters more difficult for the men on Little Round Top and Alamo East. "They're coming again," Private Rollins announced unnecessarily as the deep ranks of Imperial soldiers began advancing again. Apparently, someone with a brain was in charge down there, Captain Decker noted as the enemy front broadened. Extending to twice its previous length, the shallower but broader formation meant that it would not be as easy to stack the enemy up under fire. "Keep your heads down. Aim careful, no rock and roll. Remember, if you see a guy giving orders, drop him." Platoon leaders, squad leaders, fire team leaders. "We're not here to fight to the last man. I expect you to use good judgment in deciding when to fall back. Don't wait for orders on this, gentlemen. Now. Screaming eagles. Send him to hell." Theodosius looked uneasily back up the hill as Legate Nerva ordered the 32nd to lengthen its lines. Behind them, the 47th Legion had been ordered to join the attack. Around him, his fellow legionnaires were beginning to feel the same dread that Theodosius himself had lived with for months as they began to march past the bodies of dead comrades or some not yet dead. Some having dragged themselves behind trees or other bits of terrain. Officers who would have otherwise have put such men to the sword for their cowardice ignored them as they fought to suppress their own rising fear. For the Marines on Alamo East, a major threat was developing as a mass of cavalry began assembling. The gentler slope making for more manageable terrain for cavalry than the steep hillside of Little Round Top. Captain Douglas could call in limited artillery support but doubted that it would stop the force coming at them. "We'll give them a hell of a bloody nose first," Douglas promised, "and then we get the hell out of here." Sergeant Minato Akira of the JSDF 1st Tank Battalion waited impatiently for the order from General Hazama to commence Operation Raiden. The fuel tanks had been checked. The ammunition had been replenished. All vehicle crews had finished whatever maintenance was required. Minato's Type 10 tank would be in the vanguard of this attack, less for the 120mm smoothbore cannon it carried, than for its 70 km/h speed. General Prime intended to take a page from the American General Patton, who declared a tank's machine guns and not the main cannon were the true primary weapons of a tank. To that end, great care had been taken to assure that enough 12.7mm and 7.62mm ammunition was recovered from the incoming supply trucks to fully load every vehicle committed to the attack. General Prime believed one of the best ways to disrupt an enemy attack was with an attack of your own. Sergeant Minato was certain that the enemy would find a motorized charge led by some 80 tanks to be very disruptive. Now they waited for the artillery to finish its work, and then once the general issued the order to attack, Sergeant Minato would give these barbarians who had dared invade his homeland a lesson in modern warfare. Chorus carefully watched the soldiers around him, these Marines. It helped that they had wanted to ask him questions of their own. Basically, things like where he was from, where were the nearest villages, and if he knew anything about the army now moving on their positions. Of course, he could not say much about the Imperial Army, but he helpfully located the local villages. The Marines said something about making sure the villages didn't catch accidental fire. They did not press with their questions, seemingly satisfied that he was just a harmless local. But now he was in an ideal position to see how these strangers fought. He wondered just what else that would reveal. Ignoring the battered ranks of infantry, some 2,000 cavalry had hastily assembled for an all-out charge on Alamo East with speed and the sharpened tips of their lances. They expected to overrun the barbarians holding the hill before them. "Damned magicians," a trooper spat venomously, just in Godeson's hearing as he rode past the ranks. "And where are our mages?" another complained. It was unsurprising to Godeson that mere commoners had no real understanding of battle magic. Magic wielders in the Imperial Army came in two general types. The most common magic users were demi-humans, most of them slaves impressed into army service. The demi-human races tended to have a higher percentage of individuals with magic potential. Elemental magic proving quite useful in disrupting enemy archers and in providing limited cover through darkness or fog spells, although the current battle was far beyond the scope of such abilities, and thus far, wind magic had proven incapable of deflecting the long-range magic used by the barbarians. Elven magic was known to be extremely potent, but elves wanted nothing to do with the affairs of the Empire. Their skills in both combat and magic tended to make their small communities not worth the trouble to attack. As for the majority of human mages, most considered all pursuits other than their own research to be beneath them. The few imperial citizens with the vision enough to see beyond the mere academic were a valuable resource that took years of training to learn their craft and were not so expendable as common soldiers and were certainly never meant to stand in the van of battle. To that end, mages in the Imperial Army were specialists, much like siege weaponeers. Those that Godeson had available rode nearby in the center of the army, shielded from battle until their talents were required. Or at least that was the theory. The magic used by their enemy seemed to be capable of reaching far into the ranks of his army. For a moment, Godeson was envious of his enemies. Though known to be a weak people, they had still managed to refine incredible magic. And Godeson desperately wanted to know their secrets. If he could master that kind of power, then no honors, riches, or titles in Falmart would be beyond his reach. Though upon consideration, perhaps the imperial throne was a fantasy best left as such. No one in his right mind would challenge Emperor Molt without being absolutely certain of quick success. Emperor Molt had not stayed in power without demonstrating a willingness to destroy anyone he believed even a remote threat to his authority. Even with the power Godason hoped to master from all of this, it would be best to keep himself in His Majesty's good graces. But back to the current problem was that the never-to-be sufficiently cursed barbarians were tearing bloody chunks out of his army and visibly stealing the will of his men to press forward. If they could only reach Alnus and get within sword reach of the enemy. Godason now regretted dismissing Titian's repeated insistence that the army should remain concentrated on sacred Alnus itself. Godason had perhaps let his own ambitions cloud his judgment on that, and now a price in blood would have to be paid. Just as long as it was not his own then. It was this moment that the universe literally came apart for the Imperial Senator and Mage. Still miles away, Battery B of General Hazama's artillery fired its last salvo. Guided by spotters on Little Round Top, who, even with the fighting on their hill, had noted an unusually heavy concentration of messenger activity. One gun fired for ranging, and then Godason heard the shrill whistle of death as the shell landed short. The senator's stomach turned as shattered bodies were hurtled skyward. His mind thinking frantically as he realized somehow the enemy had deduced his location. "Shield!" he screamed to his mages, hoping their combined ability could resist the enemy magic. Then, fall corrected by observation, the other guns of Battery B fired. In the event, Godason would have been gratified to know that his hopes had not been completely unfounded, as the barrier they had put up had, indeed, prevented a tight patch of ground from being chewed into another bloody hole in the landscape. Unfortunately, his horse had been understandably terrified by the experience and reared back, throwing the senator to the ground, stunning him. Likewise, the concussive force exerted upon the shields his mages had hastily erected left most of them similarly dazed or at least drained. At this point, Legate Crassus, seeing that his patron would perhaps be a better asset off the battlefield, ordered the dazed politician evacuated to safety. Crassus would have to press this battle on his own. But as the hellish thunder finally stopped, Crassus had no inkling that he was now in command of a battle that no commander in the history of the Empire could have saved, as Centurion calmly ordered Operation Raiden to begin. General Patton's comments about the primary weapons of a tank should not be construed as considering tanks as glorified machine gun platforms, but rather the recognition that infantry still decided the winner of a battle, as in the end, it was still infantry that held the ground. A tank's mission was to facilitate this in Patton's view, whether that be by fending off opposing armor or by disrupting the enemy's infantry. In Centurion's case, he faced no recognizable armor force, but he did face a huge amount of infantry that needed disrupting. To this end, the primary weapons of Hazama's tanks were their speed and ability to grind up job lots worth of Imperial troops, being almost secondary to the shock they would generate in the tanks themselves were the wedge. Behind them came assault vehicles, to whom much of the job of actually killing the infantry would fall. The 12.7mm guns on the tanks being primarily tasked with anti-air work, fending off the Imperial Wyvern Riders who constituted the Empire's air cav units. Mounted infantry in Humvees and their Japanese equivalents would then clean up. Hazama was counting on a sudden, sharp, violent thrust to shatter the cohesion of the huge army in front of them. Events would show his confidence was not misplaced. At this point, this second Battle of Alnus broke down into three separate engagements: the attack of the Imperial cavalry on Alamo East, the assault on Little Round Top, and Centurion's thrust against the main body of the Imperial army, as the outcome of the main engagement could no longer affect either of the secondary actions. Or at least not in the short term. Captain Douglas was quite cognizant of this as the massed force of Imperial cavalry began their charge up the hill. His Marines could bloody this force quite heavily but could not stop it. Dropping mortar fire down on the swiftly advancing enemy had already taken a toll on them, but Douglas did not want his men to wait until the enemy had a chance to get up close and personal. With their mission to direct the artillery fire from the main base at Gibraltar concluded, it was time to leave Alamo East. The Marines would be back later, but for now, the risk to the lives of his Marines was not worth any more wasted time on this hill. All right, Marines. Time to go. Load up the casualties and get your gear stowed. It's time to get the hell out of Dodge. Douglas turned to Chorus. It's your choice to come with us or stay here, but I'm thinking this is going to be a very unhealthy place to be hanging around in a few minutes. The old shepherd nodded. Yes, I think you are right. Those men are going to be bitterly disappointed to find you gone when they arrive. I would rather not face their disappointment. Inwardly, the god smiled. It was sad that so many leaders would have insisted on fighting and dying for a hill for no reason other than pride. Chorus was not a pacifistic god, but blood spilled in the name of glory, ego, or vanity was an unacceptable waste to him. There was nothing to be accomplished by staying on this hill. It was time to go for all of them. Unaware of the thoughts of his guest, Captain Douglas smiled ruefully at the old man's assessment. Yes, I can imagine so. Well, just follow Corporal Rice. He'll get you squared away. We'll be leaving in just a couple of minutes. He turned to his radio operator. Sergeant Hill, get me a pen and a sheet of paper. Yes, sir. Chorus watched as the captain took pen in hand and wrote out a note, and then took his Ka bar and used it to pin the note to a nearby tree, making sure that the anchor and globe of the Corps were clearly visible. He then strode confidently to his Humvee, checking to make sure nothing else was left behind, then he got in and secured himself. What was that about, sir? His driver asked. I left the lease agreement for the new tenants. They decide they want to stay here at our homey little retreat. Then they better know who is going to come to collect the rent. Douglas clicked on his mic. Time's a-wasting, boys. Commence, Aladar. With that, Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines departed Alamo East, leaving behind a good many Imperial dead and a promise to return. With the Imperial main body now having pushed past the flanking hills of Alamo East and Little Round Top, many were the thousands of Imperial soldiers who greeted the cessation of the unholy thunder of the barbarian magic with a mix of relief and the anticipation that now deprived of tricks, the insolent enemy would be ground to dust before them. Of course, there were still many who had a terrible feeling, some based on their experience beyond the gate, and others, merely entertaining a great dread, that the worst had not passed. With overall command of Imperial forces having now fallen to Legate Crassus and the cessation of fire from Hazama and Centurion's artillery batteries, the resolve of the army briefly rebounded. Or at least the resolve of the army's surviving commanders rebounded. Thus buoyed, they urged their men on, straw men marching into a buzzsaw. At the front of the line, the battered, bloody, nervous, and angry soldiers who had survived thus far heard the unfamiliar sounds of internal combustion engines running flat out for the first and in many cases, the last time. These men simply had no time to process what was happening to them. This was perhaps merciful, as many were still in a state of shock as they were overrun and cut down. Galba was among these men, having ridden to the front of the army to demonstrate his resolve to the men. He, like so many others, died unable to grasp what was happening. This was in sharp contrast to the ranks immediately behind them, who had enough time to see the leading units of the army smashed like a sandcastle under an ogre's foot. Huge monsters from a nightmare world sneezing fire and whose feet were smeared red from the bodies that they had trampled over. These men had time enough for fear, but little else. The secondary ranks were now trapped between Centurion's mobile assault and the mass of troops coming up behind them who still had no idea of what was happening. Some men tried to fight. Fine swords of Damascus steel shattered against armor designed to withstand the high-velocity rounds fired from Soviet Cold War-era tanks. Some archers managing to loose arrows before being reduced to hamburger by automatic fire. Other men tried to run, scant few succeeding. There was no time to run and no place to run as the following ranks pushed forward, unaware of what was happening in front. Some men dropped to their knees, pleading with the gods for survival, others simply froze, unable to even panic. Legate Crassus died sometime around this point as he selected one of the huge Type 10 tanks and charged the beast, a war cry to Emroy from his throat. Whether machine-gunned, blown apart by cannon fire, or simply crushed under the tank's treads, no survivor could definitively state. It was irrelevant. At this point, the army came apart. The disaster was now upon the 6 remaining legions that had escaped to battle beyond the gate, and despite the precautions of senior army commanders, these men were less afraid of their fellow legionnaires than the enemy now in front of them. In many cases, troops now turned violently on their fellows, determined to cut their way out through their own if need be. By now, even the troops in the rear of the huge formation were becoming aware that things had gone horribly wrong. The commanders of 8 legions, seeing the breakdown of the army, elected to withdraw from the field in good order, abandoning a doomed battle. The final action to conclude on this longest day was the battle on Little Round. Mopping up the main body of the Imperial army would go on. The action at Little Round Top was the last engagement whose outcome was to be fully determined. the advantage of terrain and superior weapons balanced by the sheer number of attackers. Ironically, the collapse of the main Imperial army added incentive to the attackers. Now denied an avenue of retreat, they had all the more impetus to take Little Round Top. As casualties mounted on both sides, it did look like it might indeed be possible for the Imperials to force the Americans from the hill, until the 47th Legion found itself under attack from their own rear. These men could be forgiven for thinking that the disaster which had overtaken the main army was now coming around to encircle and engulf them, but what actually was happening was that, deprived of their own hill, the Marines of Charlie Company had made a high-speed run around the rear of the Imperial Army to launch their own attack on the troops attacking Little Round Top. With no place to go, the commander of the 47th ordered 2 cohorts of his men to turn about and dig into the slope of the hill while the remainder continued to advance. This was a viable idea if there had been time to dig in, but instead, it merely diminished the force advancing toward the summit. Up ahead, the survivors of the 56th and 32nd Legions continued to advance on the defenders, paying a bloody toll for every foot of ground. Still, victory seemed within reach, but with the report of an enemy force at his rear, Nerva found himself between hammer and anvil. He could still win, but it would be a Pyrrhic victory at best. Looking to his men as his mentor, Germanicus had always taught was a commander's duty, Nerva ordered the Legion standard struck. In the middle of this, Miles Theodosius found himself surrounded by his nightmare. It seemed inescapable now. Enemies advancing both from the front and from behind, the Legion standard had fallen and soon he would die. He wanted so much to live. To just go home. He clutched his sword tight, bracing himself for the end. "Do you really want that?" Someone spoke in a voice that sounded a bit like one of his uncle's. "Has not enough blood been spilled for Emroy's sake this day?" Theodosius looked to see a not unkindly old man gesture to him with open arms, standing between him and several men wearing clothes that were a blotch of greens and browns. The men, armed in the same way as other of the enemies from beyond the gate, looked wary but apparently were content to let the old man speak. "You have lives with many possibilities. Do not choose to end them now." The old man addressed the small group of Imperial soldiers. Theodosius and his companions looked at each other and then dropped their swords. Captain Douglas looked at Chorus consideringly as his men took Theodosius and the others into custody. "That was impressive. I just told them what they needed to hear, Captain. Now, forgive me, but all this excitement has been a bit much on an old man. I am going to go check the stream for any of my flock." He smiled. "May the gods bless you and your men, Captain." And with that Chorus, or should be said, god of blacksmiths Duncan, leaves the Alnus Hill to report it to other gods about the events on Alnus Hill. "Here they come," the corpsman exclaimed, as the first tilt rotor flew in and landed on the Mercy's small flight deck. The first one to arrive since the vessel was moved from Tokyo Bay to the American naval base. The voyage to Japan had been rather uneventful, other than a brief stop at Pearl Harbor to take on a detachment of Air Force medical personnel. Unlike her departure from San Diego, Mercy's arrival in Tokyo was met by much fanfare by the local population and was even greeted by both the mayor of Tokyo and even the Prime Minister of Japan himself. Just as promised, the arrival of the Mercy and the Soetoro Husoto had indeed eased the strain on many of the local hospital, as locals were admitted on the ships for various health problems. But after a month, they were both relocated to the U.S. Naval base at Yokosuka as part of the larger operation, Stargate. The vessels were docked together and both crews even assisted in the creation of a temporary hospital on the wharf itself. The coalition planners were preparing for the worst and were not willing to take any chances. But 2 days after the initial crossing took place, the hospital ships and their crews did not receive any patients, as it were. Not even minor injuries were sent in, as many of the hospital beds and surgical theaters remained unused and empty. Maybe the fears of massive casualties were unfounded. But that all changed when word came in that casualties would be coming in on the 4th day. As medical personnel prepared themselves for what they believed would come. But first V-22 touched down on the Mercy and the rear doors opened up. The medical teams were greeted by the sight of men dressed in strange attire being carried off the aircraft with armed guards. It was pretty obvious that these men were not coalition soldiers and that the field hospitals in the special region had done a good job at tending to their injuries despite their current limited capabilities. But obviously, they were still in urgent need of medical attention, and even though they were from an enemy nation, the Mercy's medical team still had an obligation to care for the wounded as best they could. From his vantage point a few meters away, Captain Vinkman watched as the wounded Sateran soldiers were carried off the tilt rotor and led into his ship for treatment. Unlike the majority of his crew, Vinkman already knew that those who were being treated were in fact from the Sateran Empire. The initial crossing into the special region had indeed been a success, and the battle that followed had been won. But said battle had been a very one-sided affair, as the coalition troops suffered 0 casualties after they crossed, and whatever injuries that were caused, were easily treated by the medical teams already deployed across the gate. But the same could not be said for the Saterans who had been fighting against the coalition forces. Many of whom had been killed in the fighting, while those who were lucky enough to survive the apparent slaughter, had suffered terrible injuries. Injuries that could not be easily treated by the basic field hospitals the coalition currently had deployed. As a result, the Mercy and her crew would now be tasked with treating many of the new POWs that were now being sent through the gate flown to the ship. Already the captain could see Marines and Japanese personnel taking up positions around the field hospital. As the area had now become a prisoner of war camp, due to the high number of enemy combatants that were now being treated on board. Vinkman knew that this deployment would be like no other he'd been on in the past. But up until today, he had no idea just how right he was. In the end, most of the Imperial Army under Senator Godeson's command was been completely destroyed. Senator himself was been wounded, but he was been evacuated back to Sidera. Out of the 4 legions under his command, none of them have survived the battle. Many centurions, decurions and other officers were been killed, leaving only legionaries in small groups to trying to return home by their own. Some of them has deserted the Imperial Army, some of them went into civilian life, but most of them has turned bandits and joined the bandit clans in Provence. This has only complicated the situation in the area near Alness Hill. In total, more than 60% of the Imperial Army was been destroyed. The Empire has lost more than just its finest legions, they've lost their best warriors and seasoned veterans. It would have taken at least a month for the Empire to rebuild what was it before the defeat on Alness Hill, which was later been dubbed as Godeson's disaster. While at the same time, the Allied nations' forces continued their reinforcement and encampment on the Alness Hill, thus building themselves fully functional base. However, this would not take last long, for Moldsal Augustus will soon launches another attack, however, this time he has other ideas for it. Chapter 7. A Battle of Honor and Cunning. In imperial capital the Emperor Moldsal Augustus was furious. He was sitting on his throne, looking at members of the Senate as they debated what would their next course of action be. Half of them were wanted to raise another army and try to take the invaders head on, while the other half wanted to send peace delegations instead. Damn these invaders, they are quite powerful. They've wiped out more than a half of my legions in a matter of days, if not hours, thought Mold. However, because of our defeat at the hands of these newcomers, we are now at the risk of our vassal states turning on us and even attack the capital. There must be some solution to this problem. Emperor Mold was indeed thought. He was trying to seek out solution for this problem as Senate members relentlessly argued around him. Then, an elderly man in a purple robe and orange and white attire is standing in the middle of the room. His name is Marquis Castle L. Tiberius, the Speaker of the Imperial Senate. He was also the leader of one of the major factions in Senate, the Doves, known as the Peace Seekers. His eyes shows that his wiseness is not questionable. He began to inform the Emperor Moldsal Augustus about the strange gate that appears in Alness. Forgive me for my rudeness, Your Majesty, but it was a disaster. We've lost over 60% of our fighting force against those invaders at the hill. They have taken our sacred ground and dare occupy it. How do you compensate for this situation? How do you intend to lead the nation, Your Majesty? Asked Marquis Castle to the Emperor regarding the first battle of Alness Hill. Marquis Castle, I share your concerns, answered Mold. The Empire's military advantage has indeed been lost due to this damage. I too spent a sleepless night in fear of foreign lords rising against us as one, yet in each time of crisis, have we not pulled together and struggled through. Such as during Arctic War 250 years ago, our predecessors did not lament their lost valor and pride. Emperor Mold compared the crisis today and in his great-grandfather's era crisis because of Arctic War. The old emperor started to think and looks around the room again. The Senate palace has flamboyant decorations in favor of sturdy architecture and has a huge dimension so it can provide 600 senators of the empire in one room. Do not accuse me of failing to be invincible, but compared to everyone in here, are you all going to play court day after day? Even until the enemy has come all the way to our front door. The emperor now buried his face onto his right palm hand. The empire's military advantage has been lost due to this major damage. All foreign nations loyal to our nations could join forces and turn against us. Just thinking about this is what makes you concerned. Marquis Castle was shocked. He didn't expect the emperor will think like this. Then, he says one word that even makes Marquis Castle angry for the emperor's arrogance. Pathetic, said the emperor with a smile. In every crisis, whether the emperor, senate, and people of the empire united against the problem we face. Each time, we've grown and learned from it. Not every single battle of a war can be won, Marquis Castle. I will not hold any responsibility for this. I'd hate to think that some of you would wasting this time with silly games and you do nothing while foreign forces are almost near the capital. All the Senate members are laughing and continue to chit-chat, while Marquis Castle worried about the latter consequences. In the 30 years of Emperor Molt's reign, he ruled the empire with an iron fist. Conflicts with neighboring countries beyond the empire's borders, as well as with rebelling vassals and tribes within, were resolved through the power of military. The neighboring nations had no choice but to submit in the face of overwhelming powerful imperial armies. He's completely overlooked his own responsibility, snorted Marquis Castle while looking at other way. But what is your plan? The joint forces of our empire alongside the kingdom of Arpalay and the kingdom of Durazbiaka that were sent was wiped out 95% in only 9 days. Spoke Godison, who was still in bandages because of the recent injury he had suffered. Moreover, the gate was overtaken and the enemy is invading to our world. Of course, we set out to retake the hill. Yet the enemy attacked from afar. It was like the hell itself has opened on us, unleashed fire and swallowed our troops in one gulp. I have never seen such a powerful sorcery like that. The weapons and magic that the enemy wields is like nothing we have ever seen, and their war beasts are more heavily armored and roar louder than our biggest dragons. Not to mention even more are pouring through the gate every day. What will throwing thousands more at them do? Godison was still traumatized that the Japanese, American, German, Australian, Indian and Russian soldiers slaughtered all imperial soldiers with their Sumitomo Minimi, M249, H&KMG5, and RPK-74M. Not only that, he also saw 3 squadrons of Wyvern Corps, which was one of the parts of Sateran Empire armed forces, is torn into pieces by the enemies in one night. We must fight. If there aren't enough troops, recruit them from our vassal nations. Then we strike again from the other side of the gate. General Potawan Bruttius Arcadius of the other faction, the Hawks are warmongers, push Emperor and the Senates to counterattack the other world forces, and he even suggests to forcing every nation that loyal to the Augustus Empire to join alliance. Of course the pro-peace senators do not agree with what General Potawan suggests. How will using force help us, you warmonger? Senator Ciso Antonius Perpenna protested at General Potawan. So are you just going to submit quickly to the enemy, huh? General Potawan replied Senator Ciso. What I mean, is that you'll only repeated Godison's mistake. I agree with General Potawan said. We must fight, shouted another member of the Hawks. A large bickering has erupted. Then in one moment one of the senators from the Hawks, Baron Cloten, stepped in the middle of the Senate floor. Everyone, please, I know that situation looks grim, but we must take action. The enemy from the other side of the gate has begun setting up fortifications. They are trying to establish a foothold on our side. Then I say we replenish our military might using tributes from our citizenship as well as people from our allied nations. Then we will take our newly formed legions and push the invaders back. Potawan stood up and offered his own opinion to the matter. I would not recommend that, General, answered Godison, stepping into the Senate floor as well. I was present when our legions tried to take Bath Alnus Hill from these invaders. The magic they yield is quite powerful. Our legion were not able to reach the outskirts of the hill, while they were all been destroyed. There was fire and explosion everywhere. It cut through them like knife through hot butter. Everyone was silent and shocked. The Imperial legions are the most elite military force in the world. To have an enemy that can defeat them so easily is incomprehensive, and something that scares even the oldest of veterans to the bone. This cannot continue, another senator from Doves announced, as he stood up from his seat and addressed the Imperial Senate. It is very clear to see that our attempts to conquer the world beyond the gate has been nothing more than a disaster. 60,000 of our men and boys marched off and only a handful managed to return. Now whatever they awoken beyond the gate has followed them back to Falmart and seeks bloody vengeance against our empire for our aggression. 'Tis true, another senator from Doves added, as he stood up to address the Senate. In the last 2 months, the Aulnay-Provence garrisons have been all but wiped out. The survivors claim that demons came in the night and caused havoc among the camps and forts that had been set up around the Holy Hill. Now we have reports that an army from beyond the gate has not only crossed over, but now controls Aulnay Hill. It is very clear the demons of Aulnay Hill are in fact related to this unknown army. The first senator from before spoke again. We must make an attempt to contact this army and sue for peace. Failure to do so will result in the destruction of the empire. Are you mad? And much older senator from the Hawks shot back in disgust, surrendering the empire before the actual war starts. What we sent through the gate and the Aulnay garrison were only a token force compared to what we have, and you know it. I have heard the reports too, and from what I have heard, this enemy force only numbered just under 10,000. We can rally 10 times as much and crush them in one single strike. We cannot show weakness now when our very civilization is in danger, said another senator. The enemy is soiling Aulnay with their filth and you want us to surrender at our first defeat. Your words are an insult to the empire and the gods. We must counter-attack. Our first defeat, the senator shot back. Are you forgetting the fact that already we have lost over 200,000 men? Men that were veterans and whose experience cannot be easily replaced. The gods are angry at us for sending our army to the holy hill of Aulnay, and now they are punishing us by allowing an army with supernatural powers to destroy us. We must repent now for our sins and beg them and this army for mercy, or risk the destruction of the Satyran people. The entire Senate soon erupted as many senators began to voice their concerns over the current crisis. It was only just days ago that news reached Sidera about the army that had arrived through the gate and occupied Aulnay Hill. The reports that came in painted a horrific picture. The entire Aulnay province garrison had been wiped out and there was no word from any of the senior commanders that were in command. The enemy had come through with steel beasts that decimated the imperial ranks, with strange battle mages that wielded black staffs that unleashed death on those they were pointed at. The imperial army, already weakened by mysterious happenings over the last couple months, was destroyed within an hour. With the few survivors running into the forests or, in the case of one messenger, ran his horse all the way to the capital with the news of this defeat. It was bad enough that there were stories of demons killing imperial soldiers around Aulnay Hill. Now it looked as if there was an all-out invasion of the Satyran Empire taking place. News that worried many within the halls of government. No more so than Emperor Molt himself, who had been overseeing the debate with a neutral expression on his face. But on the inside, the emperor was more than a little worried, and for good reason. Aulnay Hill was by far the holiest site in the empire and was seen as a place no mortal should ever be allowed to set foot upon. Yet Molt was able to convince the Senate to organize an expedition across the gate that sat on top of Aulnay, an action that was seen as taboo by many religious leaders, and news of the imperial army's defeat would only embolden them more. He gave the order that led to the disastrous expedition in the other world, and now whatever the empire had encountered beyond the gate, had now chased them back to Falmart itself. Worst still, with the massive defeat and the loss of so many men, it would not be long before some of the empire's vassal states get ideas of finally rising up against Sidera and freeing themselves after centuries of paying yearly tributes. Tributes that were not very popular, to say the very least. Enough of the defeatism, roared Emperor Molt, as he stood up, raising his right hand. Soon the Senate room began quiet and start listening. What will the emperor choose for his final decision? Members of the Senate, I am greatly aware of the situation unfolding at Aulnay Hill. It is true that our attempts to spread civilization and culture to the wild lands beyond the gate did not go the way the gods intended it to. It is also true that whatever defeated the imperial army in the other world, followed them back to our own. But we cannot allow these barbarians to continue to soil our lands with their presence, and we cannot show them weakness now. The Empire has stood for hundreds of years and will continue to do for many more. I do not wish to sit back and watch the situation worsen. That leaves us no choices but to fight back. The situation may be dire, but we have survived worse. For now we will use the time we have to regroup and raise new legions. In meantime, send emissaries to our tribute tribes and our allied nations. Let them assemble an army and try to defeat the invaders. The gods gave us the gate on Alnus Hill to spread our civilization to other realms, and if we were to surrender now, then we would be doing a great insult to them. We will not seek any form of peace with the other worlders until we have driven them off Alnus and back across the gate. I have already sent messages to our vassals and they are currently marching towards Alnus. Send messengers to the other vassal nations and neighboring countries that we request reinforcements. Inform them that enemies from the other world are invading our lands. We will muster the might of Godu Rhino Guaban, the allied kingdom's armed forces, and recapture Alnus Hill. His war may not have started off as well as the gods had hoped, but by Flare we shall be victorious. The Empire will survive. The Senate, for its part, seemed to have rallied behind Molt and his words. As many of the senators agreed to continue fighting. The Empire only wanted to spread their way of life to the untamed and uncivilized lands that the gods had given them access to, but the barbarians on the other side refused and foolishly followed them back to Falmart. The Empire was not about to such an humiliation go unpunished. They would defeat the invaders and show them just why Sidera was the dominant power in this world. Of course this make the minority, pro-peace senators, can't do anything except abstaining their opinion on Emperor's decision. But also, the Emperor statement makes the pro-war senators clapping and praising the Emperor. Pledge loyalty to the Emperor, Senator Quintus Albatius Genetius screaming on top of his lungs, followed by other pro-war senators. There was cheering in the Senate, everyone go to their feet and let praises to the Emperor. The Emperor himself is smiling. He was just able to strike down 2 flies with 1 strike. Then Marquis Castle walks toward the Emperor Molt. Your Imperial Majesty, are we going to make Alnus Hill to be full of dead corpses and horses? Emperor Molt responds to Marquis Castle's skepticism with an arrogant smile. This is how I can deal with this crisis. Any objection, Marquis Castle? Suddenly, the guard burst inside the Senate room. Your Imperial Majesty, he shouted, Princess Pina County Lotta has just returned into the capital and on her way here. She said she must address you and the Senate personally. Pina, gasped Molt, she's returned. The doors then opened to reveal a young woman in armor with red hair and eyes. She walked to the throne of the Emperor and bowed down before him. Pina, my darling daughter, said Molt, welcome back. May I ask, why did you decided to come directly to Senate? It's about Alnus, father, answered Pina. I was busy surveying our farther territories, when I heard the news, that you've sended our forces through the gate at Alnus Hill. Isn't that right, father? Why, yes, answered Molt, though slightly reluctantly. He knew quite well about his daughter's patriotic character. In fact, she was been known as one of the biggest patriots in the whole empire. But at the same time she was quite rebellious against her father. We have sent an expeditionary force to check out what's on the other side of the gate. You did this without God's approval. Pina cut him off. You know too well, father, that Alnus is a sacred place of the gods, especially Hardy, and you know, it is prohibited for any mortal to violate their property without the approval from their apostles. Why then you allowed our troopers to march into the gate without any blessings from the gods? But isn't quite obvious, answered Molt. The gods have opened the gate on Empire's territory, because they support our endeavor to proceed into another world and enlighten the barbaric masses there. What kind of else explanation would justify this? And yet, whoever our enemies are, they've managed to defeat 4 of our legions, stated Pina, and worse of all, they've crossed the gate and destroyed 6 more legions garrisoned at Alnus Hill and then swiftly defeated 8 more legions led by Senator Godison. How do you explain such unprecedented defeat, father? Pina, my dear, calm down. Molt waved his hand. It's true, we did underestimated our enemy, but we may manage to defeat them. We've already begun to reconstruct our armies. And how does that gonna take much? Pina continued to press her father. Do you know, that because we've lost many veterans, we have to recruit conscripts from the peasants and citizens. Young men, who never wielded the sword or don't know how to fight. Such army will be crushed by more superior enemy in matter of hours, if not minutes. I'm aware of that, Pina, answered Molt, but you must understand, that right now we have no other choice, either we win or perish. We must somehow endure and gather our strength for the counterattack. In the meantime, I've sended for our vassals' armies. They'll keep the enemy busy, while we rebuild our army. If the enemy is the same smart, as he's strong, snorted Pina, I doubt, that our vassals will be able to hold them at Alnus Hill. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised, if some of them would join forces with the enemy against our empire. What? Gasped Molt, as well other senators, but that's impossible. Is it? Shot back Pina, you know too well, that during the war, many other much weaker opponents preferred to join the victor's side. If our enemy propose our vassals freedom from our empire and offer them some protection from our wrath, they would gladly accept it, considering that many of them do not see eye to eye with Sidera. That's preposterous, roared Molt, they wouldn't dare to join these barbarians. The gods will not allow them to do that. Suddenly, a servant burst in the room, looking pale. Your Imperial Majesty, he blurted out, the apostles of Flare and Zumfoot has just came. What? Gasped Molt, that's just what he needed right now. Not only his daughter was back and pushing his nerves to the limit, but now not just one, but two apostles of the gods has arrived. Molt have a sinking feeling in his gut, knowing why they arrived. The doors then opened, and entered two new individuals. One of them were an elf with long blonde hair, wearing white and golden robes, carrying a staff. He was known as Granham, the apostle of Flare, god of the sun. The other person was a young girl with blue hair, red eyes, wearing blue clothing. Her name was Mabel Forn, she was an apostle of Zumfoot, god of the light, justice and order. All senators, including Molt and Pina, rised and bowed before the apostles, who came into the center of the room. Molt Saul Augustus, spoke Granham, we've come from our gods, Flare and Zumfoot, to demand your explanation. Why dare you violate the sacred Alnus ground and sended your forces through the gate? Molt then gulped, realized that what he was fearing has finally happened. He started, really saying his words, because we believed that the opening of the gate is the blessing of the gods. You didn't have any approval from the gods, Granham cut him off. Did you see any apostle of Hardy or Emroy near, that allowed you to enter the gate? No, quickly admitted Molt, we just thought. That gate was been opened for me. Suddenly Mabel cut in, making Molt silenced once more. The gods have opened for me, so I could go into the world with a mission, that Flare has entrusted me through Zumfoot. The senators gasped, realized, that they've committed something, that should be classified as blasphemy. But because of the Hardy's apostle Giselle, I was been hold off, continued Mabel, I came much later, only to see your armies entering the gate without the gods' permission. Because of that, my mission was been cancelled. I've returned to the other apostles and explained to them what happened, and that's why they've sended me and Granham here to demand your answer, Molt Saul Augustus. Muttered Molt, heavily sweating, and what was your mission, O great apostle of Zumfoot? That is not for you to know, answered Granham. Mabel's mission was for her alone to proceed into the world beyond the gate and accomplish it. But because of you, we now have a war that threatens not only the Empire, but the entire Falmart and God's realm as well. Then I suppose, the gods will help us defeat these invaders and restore the order, said nervously Molt. No, answered Granham, making the senators and Molt gasped in horror, our gods will not help the Empire fight the war it started. In fact, we shall now use these invaders to punish you for your blasphemy. But, muttered shocked Molt, how? Emroy has already sended his apostle to Alnus Hill, answered Mabel, she will seek out the man, who will be the instrument of your punishment. Once she'll join with this man and make a contract with him, Molt, the days of your rule as an emperor are numbered. And who is this man? Asked Pina. You'll meet him yourself, princess, answered Granham, he known in his world as the man with a fist of the North Star. Fist of the North Star, whispered Pina, looking stunned. Yes, said Mabel, his fist is the most deadliest weapon in his world. With one touch, he can kill any man who opposes him, and with one punch, he can smash the walls that blocking his way. His powers are coming from the sorrow of the innocent people, who's been offended in his world, and he buries their tears in his heart to fuel his fire of anger on those who offended these people. But the true strength of this man is love and friendship. With his friends by his side, he can gather a mighty army, and he can uses his love to touch the hearts of others to open to him, thus increasing his ever-growing legion of friends, who's ready to fight side by side with this man. If you join this man, Pina, you'll be able to save the people of Falmart, but not the empire, for it shall falls before this man. Pina, Molt, the senators, guards and servants stood in horror, as the apostles turned and leaves the room. It was then Zorzal el Caesar speaked. It has to be some kind of a trick, he said, there's no way such man could exist. We must find this man, said Molt, while we gathered our forces for the counterattack. I want everyone in the empire to look for this man with the fist of the North Star. What, so we can kill him, snorted Zorzal. No, you idiot, barked Molt, if this man truly exists, then he could be a great asset we need to defeat these invaders. I don't care, how much of gold or rubies or jewels he asked, this man must serve the empire at all cost. Personally, father, snorted Pina, I doubt, this man would ever agrees to join you. If he's so strong, then the leaders of that world would surely employ his services. Having such deadly man at their side is like having a finest sword in your arsenal. So I doubt, he'll agree to your price. Why should he, when he's been paid enough by his own world leaders? Nonsense, stubbornly said Molt, everything and everyone has their price. We just need to find it, how much he need. Molt was very arrogant and stubborn ruler, who believed that he can achieve anything with his wealth and army. But as the Senate disbanded for the day and Molt went back to his chambers, they were completely unaware that the empire was dealing with an enemy that was more powerful and cunning than anything Sidera had faced in the past. And little did Molt know, is the man they all seek was in charge of the invading army of the Alnus Hill. Fort Ginza. That was the name that had been decided upon for the Alliance's new base in the special region. Just over 3 weeks prior, the combined forces of Japan, the United States, Germany, Russia, China, Vietnam and India arrived through the gate in Falmart, thus signaling the next phase of Operation Stargate. Upon their arrival, the Allied forces came up against what was left of the imperial garrison of Aulnay-Provence. Weeks of constant raids by special forces teams had resulted in an army that was malnourished, demoralized and most importantly, unable to put up any kind of resistance. Needless to say, it was not much of a battle as once the tanks began to open fire, whatever was left of the imperial garrison were either killed or ran as fast as they could away from the carnage. 2 hours later the advancing army's Marines came upon a now deserted Fort Invicta. Despite being abandoned, the fort itself was still largely intact with the walls showing no signs of any damage. Within the first 24 hours of the invasion, Alnus Hill was firmly in the hands of the Alliance. With Invicta now being occupied and renamed Watch Tower, as it overlooked the only road that ran past Alnus. With the hill secured, combat engineers from both the US, Russia, China and Japan got to work on constructing the future base. Trenches were dug out and prefabricated buildings were being set up for the troops. Barbed wire and other obstacles were deployed around the perimeter while trucks from Japan made regular deliveries of building supplies and other construction equipment. By the first week, the Fort Ginza had dozens of buildings constructed with a combination of diesel generators and solar panels providing power. While a new well which had been drilled, now supplied Ginza with fresh drinking water. By week, the Ginza airfield had been completed with several hangars and a control tower being built. It would take some time for the air base to be able to operate combat jets, but at least now the Allied force had air support in the form of attack helicopters. By week, the other members of ANF had crossed over and the force now numbered just over 40,000 troops. With more to come in the following weeks. Watch Tower was now home to several artillery teams and a garrison of 1,000 US Marines, while Fort Ginza was now shaping out to be in fortress. A-1Ns and Japanese AH-1s now flew out of the airfield to conduct combat patrols, while recently arrived Predator and Rustam drones began to scout over the horizon to in an attempt any possible points of interest. It was during one of these flights that the cameras of a Rustam soon came upon something that almost made its remote pilot leap out of his chair in surprise. 2,500,000, General Hazama gasped out, as he and the other commanders went over the information which had been provided to them. I am afraid that cameras don't lie. General Anand, commander of the Indian contingent, replied, as he shared the information which had been given to him by the army drone crew. From what we have been able to gather, we believe that this new enemy force will not be here for another 2 days. Took them long enough to try again, snorted Colonel Gibbs. Looks like they deciding to attack from the east this time. Considering the Special Forces team blew the main road leading to the hill straight to hell, I really can't blame them. Colonel Nathan of the recently arrived Australian contingent added on. Still, that's a lot of troops the Empire is throwing at us. Somehow, I don't think these guys are Imperial. Colonel Respati replied, as the Indonesian officer looked over some of the images. These flags do not look like the ones we have recovered so far. And these uniforms. You're right, Colonel, said Centurion, examining the photos. It looks like this time Mold is throwing his vassals on us. Vassals, said Hazama. Are you sure, Centurion-san? Absolutely, answered Centurion. According to the information we've been gathering, the Empire has several kingdoms as vassals. They maintain their own independence and ruled by kings or other nobles. However, they also pledged their allegiance to the Empire and thus forced to fight their wars, in case if the Empire comes under attack. I guess, our arrival here could be reason enough to dispatch them. It all makes sense, replied Respati. After what happened to the Imperial Army, why would they continue to send more of their own when they could just send others to die? I gonna go out on a limb here, but I have a feeling that is the general plan. Anand spoke up, gaining the attention of his comrades. If these vassals are able to assemble almost 300,000 troops and with the recent losses the Empire sustained, who is to say that the Empire is using us to make sure that their vassals don't decide to take advantage of the situation? That is just plain evil. Gibbs answered back. I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't feel like being used to do someone else's dirty work. Neither do I, said Centurion. Molt want us to destroy the threat he fears, that might even become the main sand grain, which stopped his wheels. Well, I'm not in favor of making our enemy's life more easy. Which means we are gonna need as much information on these new armies as we can. What we need, is to identify the commander and which nations they are from. Maybe we can even convince them to come on our side, added Respati, or at the very least, convince them that this is not their war and we have no interest in fighting them. We have a few days before they arrive within gun range. Nathan informed the commanders. Our teams in the field could monitor them and learn just who commands these armies. Good idea, said Centurion. I'll have General Keating to send Colonel Mitchell and his ghosts to gather more information about this army. Plus, 4th Echelon Agent Sam Fisher is due to arrive to Special Region any day. I'll have him check on the main man, who leads this army. Maybe we can even try to talk them out of attacking altogether, Anand questioned hopefully, though he and everyone else there knew it would not be that easy, and if they refuse, then we would have no choice but to engage them, replied Gibbs. A thoughtful expression soon appeared on his face. Aren't the Filipinos due to come in today? Yes, the Indonesian commander replied. So are the British and the Chinese. Already, surprised Anand, genuinely as to just how fast the Chinese were able to mobilize after the government voted to take part in Tiger Strike. Yay, replied Gibbs, by tomorrow morning, we should have 65,000 troops in the fort. Not enough to beat this army head on, but maybe we can outthink them. Then let's get to work, said Centurion. General Hazama, you are in charge of working on the plan to engage this army, should we wouldn't be able to convince them to hold back. Meanwhile, I'll work on the intelligence part and the covert actions, as well on how to negotiate with the kings, who led this army. That's about it, gentlemen, we all have our work cut out for us, so let's get to it. Duran Cruzadas, king of Elbe, was observing the surrounding of the column of his soldiers, just in case if there's a surprise attack or a backstabber in this alliance. From the hilltop Duran was also watching the Alnus Hill. He was impressed by the fortifications that their enemies were able to set in such short time. To him they were quite simple. Trenches were dug everywhere around the hill with several small round huts that were dug in the ground. My lord, Duran then turned around to see one of his own soldiers on the horse, ready to give his report. Report, kings of Mudwan and Alguna have arrived with their armies. They await you in the war tent. I see, and what about the enemy? Nothing yet my lord, there was very little activity today. Tell them I will come right away. Yes my lord, and with that the soldier has departed. Duran took another look at Alnus Hill, looking at fortifications. I do not like this one bit, he thought, remembering their march towards the Provence. As the Allied armies marched forward towards Alness, morale was absolutely high. They were told that there were only 10,000 enemy soldiers on Alness Hill, and with the Imperial army backing them up, there was no way anyone thought they would lose. But that soon changed the moment they entered the Provence. Wyvern and dragon riders who were sent out to scout the area never returned, their charred and mutilated bodies found hours later by confused soldiers. Just what kind of magic could have done this? They soon got their answer when a wyvern messenger left to report back to Elb, when the men saw something shoot out from the forest and consume the poor creature and its rider in a ball of fire. Then, a sound of a running horse has approached him. The horsemen who want to inform King Duran is none other than his second-in-command. Your Majesty, we have spotted some enemy scouts, 2 hills ahead, the second-in-command pointing to the east side of Alness Hill. Leave them. We must hurry to meet the other kings and lords. King Duran choose to meet the other kings of vassal state rather than chasing the enemy scouts. Inside the Allied Kingdom's armed forces base camp, there were so many soldiers that settled in there, like a tsunami of humans. The base camp was been divided into 4 parts, and the area of each parts was almost shaped like triangle and a rectangle in the middle of it. The middle part was for the commanders, kings, lords, while in the pointy top, one area was where the Wyvern Corps was stationed, then in the bottom left, was for the soldiers of the Allied army, and in the bottom right, was where the horses and trebuchets were kept. When King Duran enters the green tent, which was the room for every commander to meet and discuss their tactics against the enemy, he saw 21 people inside the room, many of them were kings. Lords and commanders from different royal nations, King Duran from the Elb Kingdom, King Randol Grimblade from the Alguna Kingdom, King Nikitas Lofgren from the Mudwan Kingdom, Duke Hayworth League from the League Principality, King Faramund Adelnus from the Braxian Kingdom, King Hadanarik Kosas from the Tumaran Kingdom, King Sala Sarmarad from the Uvalalux Kingdom, King Herne Childeric from the Theobrand Kingdom, King Timotheos II from the Creobrid Kingdom, King Azer Xenarchus from the Creosta Kingdom, King Hubertus Alberigi from the Edrellan Kingdom, King Christopher III from the Okimor Kingdom, King Record Pandulf from the Swebanian Kingdom, King Harolds Orientius from the Thelias Kingdom, King Lama I from the Azatish Kingdom, King Imerige Sardinas from the Robert Kingdom, King Sisbud Auductus from the Hiprusan Kingdom, King Theobald III from the Oroviat Kingdom, King Fravita Frescobaldi from the Krupan Kingdom, King Matthias Legrade from the Stormgate Kingdom, Queen Richenza Grimini from the Nevermere Kingdom, and Queen Emelina Lawbrain from the Luitha Kingdom. Every representative from each vassal state were now start to discuss their tactics and plan to defeat the enemy that comes from the other side of the gate. The Imperial's army leader isn't coming. King Duran was confused as the Imperial army messenger informed him. Our Imperial army alongside the Arpale and Durazbiaka forces are facing the enemy on Alness Hill as we speak. The commander will come to support you right after the Allied army's success to penetrate the enemy defense. As the Imperial messenger continued his message, the more time we wait we will give enemy more time to dug in. If you strike tomorrow when he is weak there is chance that you will defeat him. All honors and spoils of war will of course belong to the ones who succeed. All of the Allied army representatives nodded. We would like your army to attack the enemy tomorrow at sunrise. These were the last message from the Imperial messenger. Understood. My army with Tumaran and Creosta army will take the front lines. King Randol agree and decide to take the front lines with King Hadanarik and King Azer. No. It should be us. Queen Richenza complained as she wants to take the front lines with King Theobald and Queen Emelina. Wait. We will take the front lines this time. King Nikitas volunteered himself to be in the front line and asked to be accompanied by King Record. You are free to go, messenger. Tell your generals that we will assault tomorrow at dawn, one of the kings said to Imperial soldier. The soldier greeted them and exited the tent. The moment he left the Allied kings returned to praising their own armies and claiming victories for tomorrow. I'm looking forward to tomorrow. King Randol arrogantly expect that the Allied army will defeat the ANF just in one day. Haha, my army will defeat them single-handedly. King Nikitas agree at King Randol's expectation and assume that his army will too. Sorry, my army cannot do so, King Duran. Duke League feels bad that he can give so many soldiers to the Allied army. There are less than 15,000 enemies, Our army has almost 2,500,000 men combined if we didn't count the Empire, Arpalate Kingdom, and Durazbiaka Kingdom. We outnumbered them with a ratio of 18 to 1. Do you think this is an honorable fight by going to the front lines immediately? Wait, don't you wish to be at the front lines? Something seems off about this battle, Duke League. Duke League laughed and criticized King Duran as he is worrying too much about this battle. What's the matter, Duran? Are you displeased because your army is probably not going to get the front row tomorrow? Duran looked at the man. It was his old friend from a nearby kingdom. The two of them have been friends since childhood. It's not that old friend, this entire thing seems wrong to me. Wrong. Look at this, there are around 10,000 enemy soldiers at Alnus. Our own force number 2,500,000 soldiers from all kingdoms. Even if enemy has some kind of advanced magic abilities, it would usually be one-sided slaughter. So why are Imperials asking us to strike first instead of just striking them together? Maybe they see them as small fry and don't want to bother at all. Maybe, but why then assemble armies from all of its allied kingdoms if the enemy is just a small fry? I don't like how this looks one bit. I think you are thinking too much, old friend. Let us go and rest. There is great victory to be won tomorrow. Duran could not do much except go to sleep as his friend suggested. But before going to bed, he summoned one of his soldiers in his tent. Lord Duran, what are my orders? You are to take fastest horse in our army and to ride toward Imperial army that is coming in our aid. Return as quickly as you can. Understood, my lord, and with that the soldier exited the tent, allowing Duran to finally get some rest. He calculates that the soldier will probably need 2 days to reach Imperials and get back to the camp. Duran hoped that his gut is wrong this time, it has been right his entire life. But only for this time, he prayed that it's wrong. Welcome to the Janus Theater, Sam, said Centurion. Thanks, sir, replied Sam Fisher, sitting with Centurion in his command module. It's sure good to be here. I think so, chuckled Centurion. So, did you found, who's the corrupt member of the Diet, who sold Yakuza that super circuit? Yeah, I did, answered Sam. It was Shinzo Motoi. It seems he was been blackmailed by the Yakuza, because he was been involved in uranium shipment. Nishina used it to force him to steal the circuit. I see, said Centurion. So, did the PSIA arrested him? No, he committed suicide, answered Sam. He written that he was trying to wash the shame before his country, but he couldn't, so therefore he decided to become his own judge, jury and executioner. After that, he poisoned himself. And thus he dies with honor, sighed Centurion, but I've got a feeling that Shinzo Motoi wasn't the only corrupted member of the Diet. Well, PSIA guys are keep digging, answered Sam. Sooner or later they'll find the rest of the leak. I hope so, replied Centurion, but never mind the politics, I've got more important thing for you, Sam. He then opened a folder and took from it a small photo. This is the man I'm gonna need you to work on, he said, giving photo to Sam. His name is Duran, and according to the information we got, he's the top king among others in vassal kingdoms. He's practically their leader. Sounds like a real king. All right, said Sam, looking at the photo. Looks like he lost an eye. Yes, he's a real warrior king. He is, nodded Centurion. Unfortunately, right now, he's our enemy. It seems that Emperor Molt want King Duran to attack Alnus Hill. But in reality, he's planning to sacrifice the king as some sort of sacrificial lamb. I see, said Sam. Molt wants to eliminate his possible opposition. Yeah, by our hands, said Centurion. You understand that this is fully against our principles. We do not want to do our enemy's dirty work for him, and we do not want to make our enemy's life much easier. That's why we need to get in touch with Duran, to make him understand that we're not his enemy. And you want me to become something like a messenger to King's mind. Well, I didn't think of something like that, but with a little help from Scott's ghosts, I think, we can persuade Duran to see the things our way. When we get started. Tonight, because tomorrow, they'll launch an attack. Understood, sir. That night, massive explosions erupted from the camps that had been set up and hundreds of soldiers were killed instantly. But what was really disturbing was the fact that amid the chaos, Duran has found a letter in his personal tent. No one saw who left it, but the message inside said, "We don't want to fight you, but we will if we have to." We are here for the empire, not your nations. Turn around now and we will not bother you again. Continue with your march, and it will only lead to your own destruction. Duran was furious. First they kill his men without honor and now they are ordering him to retreat. This insult would not go unpunished. He would continue to lead the allied kingdoms and crush these barbarians on Alnus Hill. With the imperial army already waiting for them, just how could they lose? Morning came and allied armies were waiting in formation. Duran and his friend had their armies at the back as reserves. The kings of Alguna and Mudwan, with 2 more allied armies, put their forces in front. The morning sun illuminated the field. Metal from 60,000 allied soldiers could be seen shining from afar. King of Alguna asked his lieutenants for one final countdown before preparing to give final order to march forward. But just as he was getting ready to give the signal he was interrupted by shouting of his own soldiers from the first lines. Look, someone is coming down from Alnus. It seemed that their enemy has sended some an envoy of 3 riders. One of them is carrying a white flag. They rided on their strange contraptions right to the halfway between Alnus and allied lines and stopped. Duran, his friend and the rest of the king took 2 guards each and ride to meet them. A white flag. Do you think they want to surrender? We shall see, old friend, said Duran, hoping that was the case. But then again this was unknown enemy and who know what could transpire. Once the kings reached the middle they together with single bodyguard unmounted and approached the 3 soldiers. They were astonished to see their enemy, as they have never seen anything like them before. Enemy soldiers were wearing strange kind of armor, each of them different, and their rides doesn't look like horses, strange contraptions on 2 wheels, with a noise coming from them. Duran thought they may be some leaders of this army. He also noticed strange weapon in soldiers' arms, nothing like anything he ever saw. But from the looks of it Duran thinked it may be ranged weapon like crossbow. He, as well the rest of the kings, noticed that all 3 of these soldiers were wearing a strange kind of symbol. It looked like some sort of knight helmet with a sword. Duran thought that these must be some sort of the knights of the other worlders. Then, what seemed to be their leader, rise up and spoke. I am commander of the allied nations forces army, Centurion Prime. I wish to speak with His Majesty, King Duran. Duran was surprised that the enemy known him well. He then rided to the 3 men on their contraption. I am King Duran of Kingdom of Elb, he said, why do you want to speak with me? Are you wishing to surrender? Before I'll answer this question, answered Centurion, I have a few of my own. For you and the other kings are part of the Empire's armed forces. We are the kings of the allied kingdoms, answered Duran, our loyalty is to the Emperor himself, who granted us autonomy in exchange for our loyalty. In that case, your Majesty, said Centurion, I suggest, you and the other kings should disengage from this battle. You ask us what? Surprised Duran. Disengage, your Majesty, repeated Centurion, our battle is with the Empire and Empire only. You, on the other hand, does not part of the Empire, so therefore, we have nothing between each other to fight for. You really expect us to disengage because you ask us, growled Duran, I think that it is you who should ask for mercy. I'll bet it was you, who set off that explosion in my camp last night, and sended me that letter. That explosion was just a warning, your Majesty, answered Centurion, if you dare to attack us, we'll have no other choice than to destroy you, the same way we destroyed the Imperial army. This has shocked Duran, since he was himself doubted that the Imperial army was been present at the Alnus Hill. Then Centurion motioned to one of his comrades, who pulled out from her saddle bag something that made Duran gasp in horror. It was a helmet of Imperial legate, all with holes and badly damaged. This is what's left of the Imperial army that tried to attack our positions, said Centurion, the rest were either destroyed or run away Ed. If you dare to attack Alnus Hill, the same fate awaits you. He then turned to his rear and pointed to the hill. Let me give you one friendly warning, he said, when you come to the hill, you'll see the signs written in Imperial language, saying, do not cross. Anyone who crosses those signs will be destroyed, unless they wave the white flags. I suggest you should do the same, your Majesty. Remember, do not cross the signs, or you'll be destroyed. Then Centurion and his comrades rev up their rides, which roared mighty, and drived away, going back to the hill. "This is some joke, it has to be," said Lieg, when Durand shown them the helmet. "If Imperial army was defeated before we came here, then where are their bodies? Where are the signs of battle? I agree, let us go back and prepare for assault. This insult will not stand." With saying that 6 kings turned around and headed back to join their armies, all except Durand and his friend. The two of them stayed behind. Durand examined Imperial General helmet and looking around while his friend stood behind him, waiting to see what will Durand say. "Marcus, my old friend." "Yes, Durand. Do you see small craters all around us?" Now that Durand mentioned it, Marcus did saw a good number of them scattered all around. "I can, but I overlooked them because they seem to serve no purpose." "And this is where you are wrong, my friend. I am betting that they are somehow connected to defeat of Imperial army that was here before us." Marcus looked at Durand with shock in his eyes. "You really think that they got annihilated by these strangers?" Durand slowly turned, still holding shredded helmet in his hands. "We will know tomorrow when the messenger I sent to meet with incoming Imperial army arrives." "You have sent messenger to meet the incoming Imperials?" "I did, because my gut tells me that they were never sent in the first place." Marcus' eyes widened at the mere thought of what Durand was proposing. He closed his eyes and bowed his head. "I really hope you are wrong about this, old friend." "Me too, Marcus, me too." With that said, the last 2 kings returned to their armies, stationed in reserve together with the armies of 2 more allied kings. Forward, King Randall commanded his army to go towards Alnus Hill. 10,000 regular soldiers, 5,000 archers, and 12 wyverns with their knights from Elguna Kingdom army, 10,000 regular soldiers and 5,000 archers from League Principality army, and the last are 15,000 soldiers from Tumaran Kingdom bravely marched to the enemy site and hoping to ambush them quickly. Reporting, one of King Durand's messengers commented at him and then started to tell about his reporting. The Elguna and Tumaran armies, 30,000 men in total, have approached the hill. The army of the Principality of Lagu follows too, so 45,000 men in total. King Durand feels relieved after he hear this report. Because he know, the enemy couldn't withstand the joint forces between the armed forces of Imperial, Arpale, Durazbiaka, and all the vassal states. On the Alnus Hill, JGSDF Lieutenant Yoji Itami alongside U.S. Marine Lieutenant Eric Hartman, Russian VDV Captain Leonid Tikhomirov, ARVN Lieutenant Lu Min and German Army Captain Johann Weidmann were observing the march formation of the enemy armies in front of them not far from them via binoculars. "Damn, it feels like we're fighting against the White Walkers," said Eric. Then, they take out their binoculars from their eyes and shake heads at each other as a sign of agreement. "Everyone, prepare your mortars now." Min commanded all of the mortar units to prepare their weapon. "Range of the enemy is 900 meters away from here, set it to 900 meters range. Elevate to 75 degrees, 900 meters distance, done." "We're all set, sir," said Tikhomirov on the radio. "Stand by, men," answered Centurion's voice, "on my mark." As the Elguna's kingdom men and beastmen crossed the signs, they've heard familiar voice booming from the hill. "Attention, Allied Kingdom soldiers. Attention, Allied Kingdom soldiers," boomed Centurion's voice, "you have just passed the sign warnings. Turn back, or we'll fire. You've got 10 seconds to turn back. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire. Commence fire," barked Eric. Different mortars from each side, M224 60mm by the United States Army, 2B14 Podnos by the Russian Ground Forces, L16 81mm by the JGSDF, and 120 Ker 40 Tampella by the German Army, started to firing at the Allied Army columns. Little did they, the Allied Army, known, an army that still used a medieval formation tactic was a wet dream for every artilleryman. Strange sound was heard. Elguna troops stayed still in confusion. Durand on the hill looked at the sky, also confused at what he is hearing. Sounds like whistling. Next moment, loud explosions engulfed the Allied armies that were in front of them. Lightning roar also heard striking at the surprised soldiers of the Allied armies. It only lasted for a few seconds, but it was enough for a cloud of dust to rise above the battlefield. Raining shells start to hit the Allied army soldiers quickly. They were killed by the mortars like they were nothing. Along with the mortar shelling, the ANF soldiers also started to shoot at the enemy with their automatic rifles or carbine rifle. Damn it. What the hell has happened? Before even Duke League finishes his words, his and King Hadeneric's bodies were torn into pieces and scattered all over the ground. When one of the American soldiers on the west side of the MOB looks at the sky, he sees 12 wyverns alongside their knights from Alguna forces heading to their position in about 1.86 miles away from the base, 3 kilometers. Lieutenant Hartman, 12 wyverns are heading to our way. ETA 2 minutes. Knowing that the enemy has air support before them, Eric quickly informed one of his fellow soldiers to activate the anti-aircraft weapons such as 2K-22 Tunguska, ANTWQ-1 Avenger, Flakpanzer Gepard, and Type 87 SPA-AG. The ANF commanders has anticipated this since the 4th day of First Battle of Alness Hill. After they interrogate one of the captured Imperial commanders that participated in the First Battle of Alness Hill, Legate Titian, ANF knows that not only the Empire will keep using Wyvern as one of their attack weapons. So, when some of the soldiers reported about another enemy Wyvern's appearance, the ANF commanders immediately brought those anti-aircraft guns that has been sent to Yokosuka Naval Base since the gate opened. Thanks to the support of the snipers, the machine gun units, and the anti-AI craft units, they successfully neutralized the enemy squadron. Just in a few seconds, all soldiers from League Principality and Tumaran is wiped out, including Duke Lagu and King Hadeneric himself, while King Randall lose 76% of his soldiers and start to flee from the battle and retreat to their country immediately, instead back to the base camp. This is not a battle. This is a fucking slaughter. Everyone retreat. We are going back to our country. But Your Majesty, we need to inform the... Forget about it. Do you choose your life or about informing Allied army, huh? Informing them would only make us to get involved again in this battle. Raise your white flag too so the enemy wouldn't shoot at us. When Eric sees the soldiers of Alguna Kingdom running away while waving the white flag, he commands the mortar unit to stop firing and let them flee from the battlefield. Duran was confused as the only thing he could hear was pitching sound in his ears. Around him he could see his own troops in panic, many of them fleeing the battlefield. From the cloud of dust he could now see troops from allied kings who first went to fight the enemy. All of their soldiers are running. Their number was quite low when compared to the number of troops that should be inside that cloud. Duran gave the hand order for his army to stay in position while went with few of his bodyguards to investigate. What they saw once the dust clouds cleared up engulfed them in terror. Bodies, limbs and blood were everywhere. 4 armies of the allied nations were obliterated, ones who were left alive by sheer luck run from the battlefield. Where's the king of Mudwan? He shouted out loud. Where's the king of Alguna? Where are the kings of Tristran and Obera? Where the hell is League? But he already knows the horrifying truth. He orders his men to tell the rest of the army to start collecting bodies. This is just the first wave of the Second Battle of Alness Hill by the Allied army. It has been 3 hours after the first offensive attack. At first, the kings were worried that they have been defeated, but they still think positively and still stand against the invaders. For that, King Sala with his Uvalaluxian troops, King Pharamond with his Braxionian troops, and King Imerige with his Roborgian troops decided to proceed to the Alness Hill. With pleasure, those 3 kings exited the tent to inform their soldiers to march to the hill. On their way to the hill, they begin to sing and chant their anthem alternately. However, when the 3 armies entered the same area where Tumaran, Alguna, and League Principality army got obliterated, they've faced the same fate as the cannon and machine gun from M1A2 Abrams, T90M, Mitsubishi Type 10, and Leopard 2 started firing at them, while some of the anti-aircraft guns started firing against the squadrons of Allied Army Dragon Corps, and also as a little more firepower ground defense, a multiple rocket launcher like M270 and BM-27M fired at the foot soldiers and war elephants. The dragon corpses fell into the ground like mosquitoes that are died of the drunkenness of anti-bug sprays. The soldiers and war elephants were scattered everywhere like toy soldiers that were tousled by a kid. What the hell? Screamed one of the Roborgian soldiers. What kind of magic they are using? The Uvalaluxian soldier is shocked when he sees some of his comrades are dying because of the explosions. I'm getting out of here. I don't want to die here. A terrified Braxionan soldier runned away from the battlefield and headed back to his country. After the death of King Sala of Uvalalux and King Imerige of Rawberg, every soldier with King Pharamond of Braxion, just like King Randol with his Alguna army, preferred to run away and never come back again, as they know that if they continue to attack, death will be their consequence. Although the runway of Alness Hill Air Base were half completed, it was still been possible to be used for the attack aircraft to take off. Meanwhile in the Allied Army base camp, King Durand feels something was off from this battle as he didn't see the leaders of the previous 6 armies are coming back. But because King Herne, King Harolds, King Azer, and King Hubertus insist to go there to check them and ambush the enemy too. Durand can't do anything except allowing them to go. When both the Theobrand, Thelias, Creosta, Edrelin, and Okimor forces came at the Alness Hill, they heard something that they never heard. What is that thing? An Oruovian soldier pointing at the sky and sees 2 flying beasts. One have a gray color with the blue circle and white star with a belt roundel, while the other one have a green and brown color with the red and white star roundel. Then the flying beasts dived towards the enemies and unleashed their fire, literally shredding the soldiers into pieces. Just like the previous offensive, they failed to break ANF defenses. King Harolds, King Azer, and King Christopher III alongside all of their men were completely been destroyed by the combined attack of the Flying Beast, Iron Turtle, and Super Explosive Magic Launcher. Meanwhile, King Herne couldn't do anything besides surrendering with the remaining Theobrandian soldiers. Unlike King Hubertus who ordered their men to leave the battlefield immediately and never come back to the base camp. I can't believe I will wave this flag again, said King Herne with a sad and hopeless expression while taking a staff and putting on the white flag. One of the American soldiers sees that a Theobrand soldier waving a white flag, but didn't leave the place with his fellow companions by using binoculars. Sir, what should we do about them? Asked Private Brian Johnston to his upper rank, Sergeant Gabriel Reeves. Looks like they were surrendering themselves to us, said Sergeant Gabriel Reeves when looking at the remaining Theobrandian soldiers. HQ, this is Gator 2-0. We see the enemy waving the white flag, looks like they want to surrender to us, what is your order? Over. Gator 2-0, this is Strike Leader, answered Centurion, approach them and capture them. If they make a suspicious move, shoot them. Copy that, HQ. Replied Reeves, executing, now. Gabriel alongside other soldiers that were ordered by the HQ are immediately headed up to the location where the Theobrand soldiers surrendered, and when they reached the place, he shouted at them. Cove. Vendos Duarte Nellaria. Freeze. Put your hands in the air, now. Major Carl Stinson, one of the officers from 1st Infantry Division of United States Army, shouted at Theobrand's soldiers who were surrendering. Tarkaanfii Akomi Dia, Nos Vamos Kaspanenk. One step more, and we will kill you, Captain Alexander Krasheninnikov, one of the officers from 36th Motorrifle Brigade, also shouted to the surrendering enemy soldiers. King Herne and his soldiers shocked is that the ANF troops are using Sidarian language to make them understand. But besides that, King Herne can see that these people are serious. So, he ordered his soldiers to raise their hands. Alright, boys. Put your weapons on the ground now. I don't even care if it's still attached to your waist. King Herne obeyed Gabriel's word, he putted his swords on the ground followed by his men. Just as they putted their swords on the ground, some of the ANF soldiers picked those swords and attached them to their belts. Now, don't do anything stupid, and follow us, said Gabriel to them. King Herne looked at the other world soldiers and see that they aim their weapons at him and his men. Don't want to die in a dishonorable way, he obeys again Gabriel's words. Welcome, your majesty, smiled Centurion, as the King Herne entered the command tent. Please, sit down, we need to talk. Another wave started again by the Allied Kingdom's army, even though they were still confused about the status of another 11 armies that have been deployed since the first day of this battle, as neither the leader nor the personnel of the army have returned to the base camp. Same as the previous leaders, King Lama I, King Sisebut, King Fravita, and King Matthias insisted to go to the place where the previous offensive army goes. Durand couldn't do anything except let them go, again. While on their way to the Alness Hill, Lama I and Sisebut have a conversation regarding what happened to the armies that were sent to the Alness Hill. You know what, Llama? I think I feel something wrong with this battle. Both 11 armies that have been deployed to fight the enemy from the other side of the gate have never been returned to the base camp. Are they all dead? King Llama laughed at King Sizebut's nervousness. Don't be pessimistic, King Sizebut. They probably had too much fun occupying the hill alongside the Imperial army. Right when they reached Alnus Hill, they saw a sight they would never be able to forget. The bodies of the previous offensive army. Unfortunately for those 4 armies, it was already too late to back off, as a strange sound comes right at them and then unleashes a strange projectile at them. As it happened so quick, both King Llama and King Sizebut perished right at that time. While on the west side of the MOB Alnus Hill, King Matthias was been dragged by one of his soldiers after his both leg and arms and his body were hit by the shrapnels. To make the other worlders give them mercy, they waved a white flag. Fortunately, it worked. The same thing happened on the east side of the MOB Alnus Hill where King Fravita commanded all of his soldiers to surrender. Then, King Fravita called his aide. Laumer, tell to Duran that we, the Kruppen forces, will withdraw from this war and also, tell them that what happened to the 11 armies on the first and second offensive is that they are fully annihilated. Not to mention, the Empire forces alongside Arpale and Durazbiaka forces were never commed for us. They've tricked us. Laumer Alberza nodded at his king and then go to a separate way to head to the Allied army's base camp. We will wait for you on the east side of the base camp. As Laumer arrived at the base camp of the Allied Kingdom's army, he immediately entered the tent that becomes a war and strategy room and then explained to the remaining commanders about the fate of the Allied army that were being sent to the front lines. What Laumer said, made everyone shocked. At first, they thought Laumer is crazy, but because he was an aide of King Fravita and the king is not the type of person who likes to make things up, eventually, it makes everyone in there worried. Their worries become much worse when some of the Kruppen soldiers bringing back the dead soldiers from League Principality, Roburg Kingdom, and Creosta Kingdom. In their horror, they see the dead body of a League Principality soldier has a hole in its forehead. The dead body of Roburg Kingdom soldier has been lost its arms, while the dead body of Creosta Kingdom soldier lost the half of its body. So, just in one day, we lost 11 nation armies and all of them were retreating or dead. How could this happen? King Timotheos was frustrated as just in a day the enemies can decrease 79% of Allied army power right after King Fravita's aide tell the situation on the Alnus Hill. Something that was impossible in this era for them. Even their calculation result was that if the enemies want to completely defeat the Allied army, it would take 10 years to do it. But each representative of Allied army cannot believe what are they just facing right now. The enemies that battling against them are completely different. Explosions, flying beasts and some kind of magic they never see. It can penetrated the Allied army defense tactics. Even their Tetsudo formation wasn't useful against the enemy weapons. What's shocking them more again is that both Tumaran, League, Roburg, Thealias, Creosta, Okimor, and Azatish forces are completely obliterated, while Alguna, Uvalalux, Braxian, Theobrand, Edrelin, Hiprusan, Kruppen, and Stormgate forces are either surrendered or flee from the battlefield. Where is the Imperial army? Why are they not coming too? Queen Richenza feels confused and scared as the Sadaran Empire aren't coming to support them. And no, I think the Imperial army would stand a chance and already vanished before us. Queen Emelina replied Queen Richenza questions. Do we have any choice but to retreat? King Nikitas offered a retreat choice before the Allied army was completely destroyed. Just what in the God's name that bastard Molt has gotten us into, thought Duran. Everyone was shaken by what happened earlier today. Duran was able to hide that fact well. But the same could not be said for the rest. Marcus, what did the priest said? He asked Marcus a question to break the tensing atmosphere. Marcus still needed few seconds to calm down and start talking. They said that never in their lifetime have they witnessed such powerful magic. The soldiers who were at the front are riddled with small holes, and some of them are literally blown apart. The formation in the middle of the army was all blown apart and their libs are scattered all around. Only those who were at the back or at the edges of formation survived. And all of them run away from the battlefield. Their flying units were also hit by the same magical weapons and they were all brought down to the earth. Dear gods, how does the Empire expect us to fight them? Queen Richenza shouted in terror. Duran closed his eyes and entered deep thought. From our beginning number of 2,500,000 soldiers we have fallen to 40,000, said Duran. Even less than that, old friend, as many soldiers are deserting, they are rather choosing to face the penalty of death than our enemy at Alnus. I see. It is a simple logic. They will have more chances trying to desert the army in the middle of the night than march tomorrow into certain death. Are you suggesting that we run as well? One of the kings asks Duran. What else we can do? Answered Duran. We now lack numbers to attack them directly, and we also do not have means to siege them. They can replenish their supplies using gate quite easily while we have to drag them from nearby town of Italica. And that is if they agree to supply us, he then sighed. In addition to that, the gate may close tomorrow or may stay open forever, nobody really knows. I say we wait for Imperial army to arrive and try again. If we fail again, then there is nothing more to do than retreat. Everyone present were shocked by Duran's suggestion. The famous Lion of Elbe suggesting retreat, said King Nikitas. There is no other option other than just run toward that hill and hope for the best. Also, as much as I am loyal to the Emperor, that loyalty does not include me giving my life meaninglessly. That honor is reserved for soldiers of Imperial legions, not citizens of Elbe, including me. Marcus smiled at his resolution while other kings discussed in private what to do. Few moments later one of the tent guards entered inside. He stood at attention and saluted his lords. Pardon me, my lords, but the soldier that was sent yesterday has returned. Already, Duran couldn't hide his curiosity, and neither could others. Tell him to enter. Tent soldier left and few seconds later the same soldier that Duran sent yesterday to meet with Imperial army returned. Duran already knew the answer, but he now wanted to hear it from the mouths of actual witness. My lord, I am sorry to report that no army was dispatched from Sidera. His answer shocked everyone except Duran, who couldn't hide his disappointment. What do you mean, soldier? The Imperial army is not coming. My lords, please, let him speak. Marcus calmed down the kings. Please continue. I started riding late in the night, but I was still able past mountains before sun rose. I stopped at the inn, located in the first town after you cross the mountain chain. There I meet up with my agents and local merchants going from capital to ask them about incoming reinforcements. To my surprise, nobody was able to confirm me that Imperial army was on its way to Alnus. Merchants that came from the Imperial capital told me that they neither saw nor hear about any army leaving the city. However, Duran raised his right eyebrow. Go on, he said. They did tell me that Imperial army did pass through their town, about 2 weeks ago. And its size was big, 12 legions in total. 14 legions. That's almost half entire Imperial military forces. And with the 2 legions that went through the gate, when it opened, that is exactly more than half of Empire military force that has been destroyed, concluded Duran. You believe the report of this soldier? One of the kings asked. I do. He is 3rd generation serving in my army. And his family has a long and proud tradition of growing up fine and honorable men who serve their nation with all they got. On top of that, he's also reported what my agents in the Empire saw as well. There is no doubt that he is telling the truth. The king who asked the question backed off. He could see cold determination in Duran's old eyes. There was no doubt that a man was prepared to defend the word of his soldier even with the use of his sword. Thank you, my lord. You can go now, and you did a good job today. Once we return home you will get a month of leave. You honor me, my lord. Soldier saluted and left the tent. The kings have no comments for what they just heard. If they knew that we would stand no chance, why ask us to fight them? Why lie to us about their army already being annihilated before we arrived? One of the kings asked the questions, but Marcus could already see that Duran was aware of the entire situation, no matter how impossible it seemed to all of them. The emperor is not a fool, King Brexall, explains Duran. By losing half of their army to unknown enemy, he also saw potential in every one of us to gather our armies and aim them at Sidera. So the best strategy he could do at the time, is to send us to halt the enemy by bleeding us to death. By doing this, he would get enough time to rebuild his lost legions and would also ensure security of the empire, and his own throne, by ridding himself of potential rebels who could not resist to attack the capital. What you saying sound quite unbelievable, said King Brexall. And yet all evidence point to that. Wouldn't you agree, King Axel? Duran interrupted him in mid-sentence and asks the king standing beside Brexall. I agree, everything points to us being betrayed by the Empire. Axel then turned to face Brexall and started comforting him privately. So, with that settled, what should be our next course of action? Asked Marcus. Duran closed his eyes and enters deep thought again, sighing as he thinks way out of this situation. There is only one true way out of this situation, Marcus. We should try talking to invaders again. You think they will talk to us after what happened today? Well, we can always try, under the banner of the white flag. If not, there is always the option of dying gloriously in battle. Duran stated so, and the other three kings agreed with his strategy. It was then a commotion heard from outside. One of the guards entered and said, Sire, it's the other kingdom soldiers. They wanted to speak with you. I thought, this might lead into it, sighed Duran. You better stay here, I'll talk with them. He then get up and exited the tent to meet numerous warriors from other kingdoms. Sir, we must turn around and leave this place at once, Theobrand commander told King Duran. If we stay here any longer, we will only encourage the wrath of these demons on the hill. I agree. We must leave at once, another commander, this one from Mudwan, added. Mudwan had lost its king and the men have lost their will to fight. If we stay here, then I am afraid that many of them will revolt. You've just spoken the words myself and other kings have spoken to each other, said Duran. It's quite obvious that we've all been betrayed. We've been fighting the wrong enemy. Sir, surprised other warriors. It's not the Otherworlders were our enemy, said Duran, it was the Empire all along. The Empire is the real enemy. Molt did not send us here to drive off an invading army, he sent us there to die. What? Gasped one of the commanders. It can't be, shouted another. Think about it, men. Where was the Imperial army they've been babbling us about? Did you saw any signs of them? We thought they had already been wiped out by the enemy, replied the Mudwan commander. That's because they were never here. Molt has played all of us like fools in his court. Impossible, gasped one of the Theobrand soldiers, our king has died, because Emperor Molt has sent us all here to die. I'm afraid, that's the case, suddenly heard another voice. Everyone turned to its source and saw Centurion Prime. Good evening, your majesty, he said, looks like we've met again. The other warriors couldn't believe to see the commander of the Otherworlders to appeared right before their eyes. So, your majesty, said Centurion, are you ready to talk? You surprise me, Centurion, said Duran, I've never thought that a man like you could appeared right in front of your enemy tent. Well, I thought that now with most of other kings are gone, and others are our guests, answered Centurion, you and the rest of the kings will finally be sensible enough to listen to reason. That's why I came here to have a little chit-chat with you. Why shouldn't we take you prisoner? Growled one of the Mudwan soldiers. I wouldn't recommend that, answered Centurion, do you see those blue dots on your chests? The warriors gasped and saw the small glowing dots on them. These dots are from the special devices used by my best shooters, explained Centurion, they allow them to hit their target with precise accuracy from kilometer distance. I'm sure, you've already known how our weapons work. So may I suggest that you should not try to make any foolish attempt to capture me, or you'll be going to your goddess of underworld. The very mention of Hardy was enough to keep the warriors to stand down. Impressive, Sir Prime, smiled Duran, I can see that you've got a lot of tricks up your sleeve. I may be brave enough to face my enemy alone, your majesty, answered Centurion, but I'm no stupid. When I came here, I've decided to have my special team of ghosts to cover me, just in case. And in case if you think you can still fight your way out of this, you should know that right now my 2 infantry brigades have you surrounded. So, if our negotiations does not goes well, you all be destroyed. Consider it an extra precaution, just in case. So, said Duran, what do you want from us? Simple, answered Centurion, I think it's time for us to clear things out. Why are we here, and why are we fighting the Empire? I believe, you and the other kings would be quite interested to know why Molt has decided to send you here. I've already talked with those kings who surrendered to us, but I think you should need to know that by yourself. Very well, said Duran, please, enter. Thank you, your majesty, answered Centurion. He walked past the soldiers and entered the tent, following by King Duran. Several hours later, the allied kingdoms' armies were leaving the Alnis Provence. Duran himself still could not believe it as he rode his horse. Just days ago the royal thought that he was going to rid Falmart from invaders from another world, now he was leaving as one of their allies. And not just him, but other kings and queens as well. What they've heard from that man, Centurion Prime, has changed everything for them. They now know who these people are and why are they here, but most importantly, they knew that it was the Empire who started this war, a war they could never win, for they've angered not just one country, but the entire world beyond the gate. But fortunately for Duran, these strangers turned out to be merciful. They've even released the captive kings and their men, who's now rided with them back to their kingdoms. But most importantly, Duran and the other kings has finally saw the opportunity to escape the iron grip of the Empire. For the first time in over a century, the kingdoms that once fell under the shadow of Sidera now had an opportunity to break free of the Empire's influence once and for all. Sure, the treaties between them and the coalition had yet to be drawn up and signed, but the prospect of being free of the Empire's influence was just too great an opportunity to pass up. It was a bittersweet moment though, as the kingdoms of Mudwan, Theobrand, League Principality, among others, were now without their leaders, and there were many sons and fathers that would not be going home. There were gonna be many families that were going to need assistance after today, and there was no doubt in Duran's mind that this was Molt's plan all along, as this would give more than enough reason to invade. But the coalition promised that they would not allow this, as they had offered protection and assistance if it was ever need. All the coalition asked for in return was for information. Information that the old king was more than willing to give, and he would have some work to do once he made it back to Elb. As his army marched past the sign that met them when they first entered the province, the only thing Duran could think of at that moment is to just what was waiting for the Empire on Alnus Hill. Molt had not only violated the unspoken law by marching his troops onto Alnus Hill, but had angered a coalition of nations that were here to punish him for the crimes his army committed upon their people. Duran could not help but to smile at this thought, as the idea of the Empire finally getting their just desserts almost made up for the fact that his friends were dead. They were dead because of Molt and his lies. The only thing Duran regretted was that he would not be able to see the look on that old son of a whore's face when the Emperor found out that the Allied armies were still intact and were more than ready to drive off any invasion he may have planned. Meanwhile, from another hill, a strange figure with halberd was watching the whole event. "Very impressive," she said. "It looks like these other worlders are the same tough as Duncan said." "Yes, Rory," answered the voice in somewhere in heavens, "that is why I need you to join with the man with the fist of the North Star. With his powers, we can not only be able to punch Empire, but also teach Hardy a lesson she'll never forget." "I understand, Emroy," said Rory, "and don't worry, I will join this man. For now, I'll just watch over them to see what else they can do." And with those words, the strange person leaves. Today marked a new day for the people of Falmart. Things were about to change in a big way, and the Empire was completely helpless to stop it. This is the end of part 4 of this What If. I hope you guys like it. Leave a comment down below and subscribe to the channel to see more amazing contents.